Bienvenidos, Antonio Romano.
3 seconds, 4 seconds. Counting up.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. 2 pre-questions. Would either of you believe it worthwhile to read Aquinas? Yes, but no. I would recommend...
I actually referred to him in the last episode.
I would recommend actually getting, I'm looking at it right now. I have is it the Cambridge or the Oxford... Let me go grab it real quick so you can see it. But
okay.
Never read him first. Read somebody writing about him first.
That's an interesting point. We always advocate not doing that. So Riley just actually broke the rule. Ad fontes, to the sources. Right? I just said you broke the rule. It's supposed to be ad fontes,
There you go.
Oh, the companions. Yeah, I have one of those on... well,
there's one on Luther that's
Augustine.
Really good,
I think I have the Augustine one.
Yeah, and I've got the one on Augustine too.
What Kretzmann is that at the bottom?
This is Norman Kretzmann.
I don't know Norman Kretzmann. He's not one of our guys.
But Paul, I would recommend, this is true, actually, this is Augustine. I have the Aquinas one up there too, but...
you grabbed the Augustine one.
I did, but I would recommend that, and this is for anyone, lay or pastor, if you really want to get into a theologian, and, well, with Augustine, they have such a huge body of work, it's like, where do you start? Because like we've talked about, if you read early Augustine, he's not the theologian, he's not mature. He's new. He's still very Neoplatonic, still wrestling with Manichaean dualism.
You almost need that little bit when they share selection. You need the commentary to remind you of this.
Yeah, and it's like Confessions is a good place to start, but that's not theology. That's more of him writing about his conversion, and it's very poetic and it's very effusive. So where do you start? And I think if you read Brown's biography of Augustine, which is fantastic, or this Cambridge Companion to Augustine, where you get different theologians, different scholars writing on different topics in Augustine, then you can kind of cherry pick where to start. Because some people will ask, well, I want to read the City of God. I'm like, that's probably not the best place to start. Because one, it's enormous, and two, he's got a whole bunch of stuff going on in there. And it would be nice to read a scholar on the two kingdoms and how Augustine understands two kingdoms, the city of God and the city of man, Athens and Jerusalem and that kind of stuff.
Right.
Same, but with Aquinas then, because he is...
Like we said, in the last episode I mentioned the Summa, but I mean, that's a huge text. Summa, it's because it's systematic, and it's systematic, right?
Yeah, it's medieval. It follows a medieval form of dispute, debate, point, counterpoint.
Well, I have the Sunday sermons, though. I mean, that might be an interesting place to go.
Sure.
Because he did both the epistles and the gospels for the historic lectionary.
But I would still start with a companion to him. Let other scholars introduce you to him. Not to say that they're right or wrong, but rather let them introduce him to you. Then go read selections from Aquinas. And it's almost like exposure therapy to me. It's like you have to kind of very slowly approach. I did this with Luther. I was
trying to figure out what we would do on the show. You're talking about what you would recommend to
just in general.
Somebody starting off. Okay.
When I started reading Luther, a friend's dad just gave me a large catechism to read, the old soft paperback.
Yeah.
And then from reading
that's actually pretty good.
My pastor in Portland gave me Dillenberger's anthology of Luther's works. Mm-hmm. And then I slowly graduated up to just reading Luther.
And Dillenberger's 600-page paperback or something, 500 page?
Yeah, it's like $12 or $10 on Amazon.
Yeah.
But getting introduced to Luther that way helped me not be overwhelmed. Because once you finally read the Romans commentary or Galatians or something, there's so much, and he's so effusive, and he goes in so many different directions that you can get lost real quick and get frustrated, frankly, because you're trying to follow a 16th century theologian.
Right.
He's not anything like us in his.
I mean, you could use Paulson's book, like Luther for Armchair Theologians.
Yep.
Except it doesn't have as much actual Luther,
right.
text.
It's more the theology of Luther or Lutherans. Right. Versus biographies.
There's plenty of quotations, but it doesn't really give you as much of Luther himself.
But the Cambridge Companion to Luther, which has Nestigan, it has Wengert, Kolb, it has all the kind of top guys from the boomer generation writing about Luther. And so you get a nice introduction to that. And going back to Aquinas then, the problem with Aquinas is, one, he's medieval. Two, he's an intellectual, dogmatic. Three, he writes in the Summa form genre. So
he's a classicist, so he writes he He reads Aristotle. That's right.
Right. Yeah, and he reads Aristotle. So if you don't know Aristotle, you're not going to understand Thomas Aquinas.
Right.
And if you don't understand what he's responding to, you're not going to understand what he's writing about. And would I suggest reading Thomas? No. Would I recommend learning about him? Yes.
I don't know. I think you have to consider him, a foundational figure, at least in the history.
I don't think so.
Western
Western
thought.
No, he wasn't for the late medieval church.
You don't think so?
No, I know he wasn't. This is all through Luther. I mean, you read Luther and you read Luther scholarship. Thomas Aquinas was not like the preeminent theologian of the late Middle Ages. There were others, and you still, the guys like the Lombard and Bonaventure, they quoted the Aquinas. So even the guys in the late Middle Ages weren't reading Thomas. They were reading guys taking sentences from Aquinas and commenting on them.
It definitely is, though, for the Enlightenment Roman Church.
It's very important for the Enlightenment later. But go read the Council of Trent. Go read how many times they quote Thomas Aquinas in the Council of Trent. They don't. Not that often.
That's true.
And, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that. We don't have to get into the weeds on that. But when you start reading medieval theology, like I got fascinated with Duns Scotus during my seminary, my master's studies, and went down the rabbit hole reading Duns Scotus, who, again, is like Aquinas. And
but he has a cool name, though.
Yeah, he has a super cool name. But reading Duns Scotus, you might as well just eat mushrooms and then read him, because he's just sitting alone in a monastery thinking about metaphysics 24/7. And so he's off. He is so far gone. Like when you start reading him, you just lose contact with the earth, because it's not incarnational. That's really, and actually we're reading that today, so it's a nice segue. But like, I don't find Aquinas before the Council of Orange to be very incarnational, because of those Platonic categories and the dualism. And there's the influence of pseudo-Dionysius on the Middle Ages and the medieval theologians. Yeah. And he wasn't Dionysius, he was pseudo-Dionysius, because turns out we don't really know who this person was, and they claimed that they were Augustine. That's how it got into kind of medieval teaching. I suppose we should probably be recording this, but oh well.
That's okay. This is all pre-show.
Yeah. And so anyways, I think you should definitely learn about any theologian you're curious about or interested in, and not post about it on the social media, because that will just get you more confused and frustrated. Anything that you don't want to be upset or frustrated or quit. Like, I'll give you an example, actually, to my point. Like, I quit reading the Lutheran Confessions for like 2 years, because I was so disgusted by the way that people use and weaponize the Lutheran Confessions against other Lutherans on social media, where I'm just like, I don't even want to have this.
That is actually how they were often used historically.
Right. And I think they're wrong. I think they were wrong then. I think they're wrong now. You don't weaponize your confession of faith.
People are territorial and tribal, and
keep going.
I don't know how this is avoidable. His other question.
It's avoidable by not having the conversation.
I have two things. The first is that if you want to understand why we might not be a big fan of Thomas, I guess, is because he almost gives equal weight in his commentary to Aristotle as he does to the scriptures. Right. He does more on the scripture, but there's plenty of like philosophical commentary.
Right. Well, that's his hermeneutic. I mean, it's not like he reads scripture without Aristotle writing shotgun.
Correct. And that's our biggest criticism, I would say. It's to Hermann Sasse. I have my suggestion. You can chime in with yours, but I think it's This Is My Body would be the place where I would start.
If I were to start, I would start with his essays.
Which one? Lonely Way?
Yeah. Otherwise,
or Christ in the Church.
We Confess actually is really good. I love We Confess, the Incarnation. We Confess, the Sacraments. That anthology of those 3 books. But I would go with A Lonely Way, just because you can then take him in pieces, whereas I think This Is My Body is super dense. And it's like We Believe, We Confess, right? You read We Confess, he's attacking Barth. And if you don't understand Barth, well, there you go again.
Right, well, that's my point, is whereas, This Is My Body is both it's a Lutheran confession.
Theology,
Yeah. And I think that might be... require less baggage, right, that you need to kind of pick up.
Yeah, but again, I'm not against it. I agree with you. I think This Is My Body is I think that's kind of the high point, though. I think that's something that you should work up to. Okay. Whereas if you start with like We Confess the Sacraments, and you learn about his because those We Confess ones, they're almost like little catechisms, primers on his theology. And you read We Confess the Sacraments, and then go read This Is My Body, and all the pieces fit, because in We Confess the Sacraments, he critiques Barth and Reformed theology. Right. And he says it. And then you go read This Is My Body, where he'll spend like 6 pages on Reformed theology and Barth's theology of the sacraments. And
Right.
it's like, that's kind of his, like, this is my flag. Like, when I die, this is my body. Here it is, right here.
Yeah.
But no, I think, that's a high point for sure. But same thing. I mean, you can read essays on Saze by Norman Nagel. What's his face? John Pless. Our friend John. They've done a lot of work with Saze. The reason that Saze is not more popular is because American Lutherans poo-pooed Saze because he wasn't kosher enough for them. He didn't belong to a team. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, he didn't really make himself out, to be a team player.
Well,
he came
wasn't.
and spoke, didn't he? He didn't speak at a Synod convention.
He
I think he
spoke
just
at
spoke.
Wisconsin. He spoke at a lot of Wisconsin Synod stuff.
Okay, and he
Yeah.
did come and speak at St. Louis Seminary.
He did, but he was. Do you know the story behind this?
No.
Okay. So since we're not recording, we are recording. No, we're not recording. We're just live. So Saze was invited to lecture at St. Louis. And some of the profs at St. Louis found out about this. And there was this kind of continental versus American war going on at that time, theologically. And because Saze had had a nervous breakdown after the First World War, the professors at St. Louis went to the dean and said, you can't have this person around our boys. He's mentally unstable. So they uninvited him from teaching at St. Louis. And that's why they never translated his works. That's why the Wisconsin Synod are the ones who translated most of Saze's works for us, leading up to our President Harrison and Norman Nagel translating them for Concordia Publishing House.
Oh, okay.
They vilified him in the United States. And then when he went to Australia, yeah.
Yeah, he found a home there.
But think about that. He's vilified in his own country. He's vilified in the United States,
Yeah.
except by the Wisconsin guys, and then a few people here and there. So he has to essentially go to Australia and make his own church, which is what he did essentially.
Right,
by
and
uniting the
they've
two
they've
branches.
completely rejected pretty much.
And now they completely rejected him. Yes, exactly.
Right.
I mean, you think you feel bad if you're a church planter that one of your churches closes up? Think about the entire continent turning against you. But that's the gospel. So, yeah. But don't
Hijacking the pre-show.
You never
That-
hijack the pre-show. It's so much more
That's
fun
what
to
the
answer
pre-show
questions.
is. It's just
Plus, it's a good question. We get some
Yeah.
wackadoo questions. I think they're from bots. But
we haven't had that many trolls. We've kept our viewer. I don't know. I wondered, like, how do you gain access to these people so that
yeah.
I get the crypto bots on platforms.
I get them
But
on
that's
Instagram.
only
yeah.
That's because I've reposted or retweeted or whatever some crypto things, and so then you get latched on and they comment on everything.
Right.
But so it is.
It is what it is. And it's just going to get worse. I think because I'm, in that art, I'm over in the art ecosystem
Oh yeah,
again.
yeah.
One of the things, and I go back to Trent Reznor. There's a documentary made by Dave Grohl called Sun City about
Oh,
the
yeah.
old recording studio, right?
Right.
And they're talking to Trent because so Dave Grohl, Trent Reznor, and Josh Homme, they do this little kind of freestyle improv
Little
session.
trio thing. Yeah.
It's really cool, actually. It's very meditative.
like
I
it.
love it. But then in one of the outtakes, or maybe it's in the movie, but
Like
anyways,
3 people that are messed up too, though.
but Trent's asked about technology and what he thinks about people using auto-tune and all these things. And he says, listen, all this stuff is a tool, right? And I see it as a tool. He said, artists today don't see it as a tool. So they become used by the technology because they don't realize, like, you still have to have talent to use this technology to create music. So that's why nobody tries to imitate Trent Reznor, because they can't. So they can sound like Filter, for example, but the guy in Filter used to be in Nine Inch Nails. That's why Filter sounds like Hey Man I Shot sounds like early Pretty Hate Machine,
Right.
Wish era.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the producer Flood. That's Flood.
No, Flood. But
Nobody
so
can
I
sound
tell
like
people
Flood
the same
either,
thing,
though.
because
That's the
everybody's
other-
up in arms about AI art apps that can just generate this like art that imitates anybody else's art, right? And it's essentially stealing. That's what you're doing. You're stealing someone else's art, and you're not. And the thing is this. So, like what I do,
But
because
imitation is
well,
greatest
I'm
form of
getting
flattery,
there. So,
right? Yeah.
Like right now, I'm doing a series on Dave McKeon, or I'm doing a series that's inspired by Dave McKeon. And Dave McKeon is a British artist. He was highly influential on me because he did all the Sandman covers, Sandman graphic
Right.
novel covers.
That's what I know him from. Yeah.
He's done a lot of he does Buckethead covers because he's good friends with Buckethead, the guitarist. He's all over the place. He actually did illustrations, I found out this morning, for Our Favorite Atheists.
The one Buckethead show I saw, I was
It's
much
wild,
younger.
man.
I was
It's
like,
wild.
what is the deal with this guy? I mean, he's great.
Dawkins. He did Dave McKeon did the illustrations for one of Dawkins' books.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh,
So,
okay.
but when I was at seminary, actually, and I used to go to Kinko's, and at the time, Kinko's had this policy that you were only charged for the copies you brought to the counter. So I would get all of my collages together, all this different art that I had assembled, photographs, writings, paintings, all this stuff, cut them all out. I'd make laminates. So, like overhead projector laminates.
Yeah, right.
And I would take all these collages and I would put them together on the printer, and then I would make a clear printer and then overlap those. So I would spend like 3 hours in Kinko's just blasting through their paper and their laminates, and then bring up 50 copies to the front desk and pay like $12. And I would do that on weekends. I would just go and make these Dave McKeon inspired like collages. And so I do that. I'm doing that now.
But digitally, yeah.
And I do it digitally, and I'm using 4 or 5 different drawing apps, and I'm using an UpRes app, and I'm using an AI app, because I can put words into the AI app and it will generate images for me. And then I'll take those images and then I'll use those as a template for painting and drawing, right? But my point is then...
But I mean, a visual collage is
Yeah.
basically like a mashup or
Of different things that
mixtape
I
or something
myself
like that.
created, though. Like, I'm creating all those images.
Yeah, but
That's
that's what a hip hop guy does, right? I mean,
Right, no,
they
100%.
make their
Exactly.
loops, their beats, their
Right.
whatever. Yeah.
Right. And so what happens then, that's why I use the Resonator, because that's always stuck with me, is that if I'm going to do anything digitally, art, music, and like the bump music for this show even, or the bump music for Warrior Priest or whatever, is that one, it has to be mine at the end. And number two, I can never allow the technology to dictate to me the outcome of my project. I have to be using the tool in this way so that the outcome of this project is still mine. Whereas a lot of people are stealing other people's art, not giving them credit, not saying inspired by, not saying, hey, you know what, I'm really inspired by Edvard Munch or Alphonse Mucha or somebody. I'm not going to give credit to Mucha for the Kiss, right? And then you're like, dude, that is obviously an Art Nouveau piece that you ripped off from Alphonse Mucha. Like, every college student has a poster of this in their dorm room, right? And you're like, no, this is my art. It's like, that is not your art. You stole that. You didn't give credit to this guy. You just typed in or literally cut and pasted this into some other app and then called it your art or your music, right? And the thing with loops, like in a mixtape and a beat, when you're looping, you're taking a piece and then you're manipulating it. You used to anyways. Not nowadays. They
don't even bother anymore.
They do
no.
the puffy method of just taking and cutting a riff out and just repeating that riff ad nauseum. And there's no creativity to that. But you look at like Jay Dilla, for example, is a famous producer, or DJ Muggs, very, very famous producer, who make beats. And you listen to their beats, and then they'll say, like, this is 6 different songs that I put together to make this one beat. And you're like, I would have never guessed if now that you told me, I see it. But you made that your own, right?
Right. Well, I'll give you a parallel. So I've been watching some documentaries on sound design, and it used to be, you've probably seen these in the old film documentaries,
Right.
The guys would go out and they record sounds in real life, be banging a metal rod against a high tension wire or something.
Yes, exactly.
Capture that and then flip it upside down or backwards or slow it down or whatever.
You have your phaser sounds.
Yeah, right. And so you create these sounds. And now they've got, like Lucasfilm, for example. I mean, they've got an archive of hundreds of thousands. They create some sounds for a new movie, but a lot of them they just reuse from previous things. Maybe they manipulate them a little bit, but for the most part, it's like, we just have this huge library. We put in keywords and then, we pull out what we want. And it's like, I mean, there's something just missing. It's not quite as organic,
Well, that's what I mean. And there's no such thing as a Luddite when it comes to art anymore. It's impossible. It's like music. You can't not do music without using technology. It's impossible.
Well, I don't know why you would. I mean,
Well,
if you
that too,
really,
but
okay, there's
Right.
an exception, right? Because, Christopher Nolan, he went to Kodak and said, look, I want to shoot IMAX black and white for Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
And so Kodak, I mean, he's big, he's got a lot of money, or he gets a lot of
Right.
money one way or another.
Yeah.
It's like, we'll generate a new film stock just for this film.
Yeah, right.
Right. And so you can shoot 70 millimeter film because you're weird that way.
You know why I think he did that? Because there's this movie that Fincher did called Walk, which is filmed in black and white, but he only uses digital. So he had to go back in after the fact and then make it look like a 1930s film because it's Gary Oldman.
No, isn't it Monk?
Or Monk. Is it called Monk?
Mank.
No,
Mank.
Mank. That's right. By Mankiewicz. It's about Mankiewicz. That's right.
It was on
Joseph
Netflix.
Mankiewicz.
Right.
Mank. Anyways, so you watch Mank, and it's obvious that this is not.
The whole thing was faked. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing was fake because it doesn't look like the film stock. You can't imitate that film stock. So I wonder if Nolan didn't see that and went, "Oh, I definitely need to actually have the film because I can't. It looks bad."
Well, I don't know how he convinced just shoot the whole thing in IMAX 70mm.
Money.
Right. Well, you imagine, July 2023, right. If movie going is going to come back, that's probably,
right.
This is going to be the last hurrah, would be my opinion.
So to segue into the show then, I think because you can use art in the same, again, you can apply this to preaching and teaching, which is this. An artist at the core, an artist is attempting to express in sound, in vision, in words, the overlap between the metaphysical and the physical.
Yeah.
Because you're talking about things like judgment or love or longing or frustration, right? These are metaphysical things, justice. And you're not just like, hey, look, they're holding hands. It's like, no, but why are they holding hands? I need to figure out that, and then I need to express that.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're teaching and preaching theology, back to Antonio's original question, that's how I'm actually judging most theologians, myself personally, is we are basically we're curators of information. We're curators of both metaphysical and physical information, and then we seek to express that in a particular way.
Yeah, right? An astonishingly rich tradition.
Yes. So in the pulpit, this is how we're doing it. When we're teaching in Bible study, that's how we do it. When we're writing poetry, when we're singing, when we're painting or drawing, it's all in the same pool where we're bringing all of these disparate, seemingly, that's why the best artists are pattern recognition people.
Right.
Because I can listen to rap out of one ear while I'm writing poetry. My kids are playing in the other ear. I can smell the coffee and all of that. And I'm sitting there on my bed and I'm thinking about, like, what is this all about? Like, what does this even mean? And then one thing will catch my attention and I just go with that.
Right. But I think pattern recognition is probably the best way to define intelligence. Because intelligence isn't knowledge, but I think it's recognizing the patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. I think that's
so. If you want to make an intelligent art, meaning art that seems to have some sense of it's trying to communicate, even.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, right, is that like I've talked about on the Warrior Priest podcast, is like for me, art is when I'm doing it, but as soon as I say I'm done, it's over. There's no more art. That's done.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as you publish it, it's completely out of your control. That's why I've never published a lot of my art. Because once it's out of your control, people can just whatever, right? And like with my poetry, it's like people can criticize my poetry, and I'm like, that's fine, because I'm writing poetic verse, so there's lots of analogies and metaphors and similes and double entendres, all this stuff, right? So it's interpret the way you want. Whereas when you look at like a drawing of mine, I'm like, look at the drawing, look at it,
except the poetry, at least the stuff you've been posting as of late, is not all that vague.
No, it's not. I've become a little bit more specific around the holiday.
Right. And so I think that's what a lot of people look for with poetry. They like the simile, they like the metaphor, the double entendre, but not if it gets too precise or too close to home.
Right.
Right.
Which I think is, at least for me, is impossible because you're reading the prophet, like we talked about, like when you're reading the prophets 2 or 3 times a week, like they're very metaphorical, obviously. But yet,
but it's not. It's not
very
big.
direct metaphor.
Yeah.
It's like you're not the meat. This isn't the pot.
You know what he's talking about. Is
right.
my point.
Right. I think that's one of the best things in all of the early chapters of Ezekiel is when Ezekiel says to the high priest, like, some of you are going to die because God said so, and then the high priest drops dead while Ezekiel's preaching.
Yeah, that's pretty evocative, right?
So
there.
You're like, so is this a now or a not yet kind of thing, Ezekiel? And then blah, he just drops.
That's awesome.
Like, yeah. So, anywho, I think that's part of your responsibility, if you want to call it that, or vocation or calling as a Christian, is lean into your curiosity about theologians and just read them. Don't worry about what other people say or don't say, but also just give it a good hearing. It's like I've talked about, go to a church for 3 to 6 months before you make up your mind. I think I learned that from Capon or Peterson or both of them.
At least, 3 weeks isn't going to do it.
No, I don't think so. No, because you've got to get into the flow of that congregation, the personality of it. And do you really know everything that you need to know about someone after 3 dates? If all 3 of those dates were 1 to 2 hours? No, of course not. It takes months to learn enough about a person before you go. That's why
I'm
most
not a fan of
occur.
like 6 month or 6 year engagements, but 9 months makes sense at least.
Yeah. Well, you see that, right? In a relationship, to use the analogy, is around 6 to 9 months, you've basically figured out whether or not this person is someone you want to invest more time in.
Right.
You don't, like you said, you don't need 6 years and then go, oh, now that I've had time to think about it, I don't think we're compatible. It's like,
now you're just faking it. Yeah.
And it's the same thing with church. You don't have to stay at a church for 6 years to know you're dying on the vine. It's about 6 months, 3 to 6 months. Again, stay for a season, right? Stay for Advent, stay for Lent, stay for the summer, stay for Trinity for 57 and a half weeks. The 1,000 years.
Nice exaggeration. Maximum of 27. Okay.
That's right. That's right. It just goes on and on with that ugly.
Maximum of 27. You don't need to exaggerate.
green.
It's 27 is long enough.
Oh,
Well, and everyone gets either into a funk or into a rhythm or into a zone that, and maybe it doesn't resonate with you, but it'll pass. It'll be there'll be a change, right? Hopefully, unless we've met boring preachers.
That's right.
That just stay boring.
My wife apparently is listening to us and now texting me that we were engaged after less than 3 months. Yes.
Yeah, we were too.
I kissed a lot of frogs that didn't turn into princesses before I met my wife. So when I met her, I was like, no, we're good.
Compare and contrast. Yeah.
Lock it down. Let's go.
Yeah, that's right.
You're nothing like all the other gems that I courted. So
well, that's why I also don't like the long engagement, because it's like, are you really going to commit to this person now?
Right. Right. Exactly.
Because if you didn't know you
It's
knew
the
a while
now
ago.
and not yet of the old. Yeah.
It's like, I mean, there's going to be a degree of commitment here that's going to have to transcend whatever happens.
I'm going to hit. Oops, that's not it. This is
what?
Get out. I'm sorry. Got too many toolbars open. There we go.
Right.
We're pretty. We're pouncing.
Got dots?
We're dotsing.
Well, there's no dots anymore, actually.
I have dots. Dot, 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 dot.
They're kind of like dots. It's the counting up. That's what you want. That's what you want.
You don't have the little bar on the bottom?
Oh, yeah, there's those. They're bars.
Right. Yeah, my wife is just now telling me we've never fit any societal expectations as a couple. And water is wet. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for being here at this very special Christmas episode of the podcast. This is the Banned Books Podcast, episode number 286 and maybe 287. And we're going to read C.S. Lewis on Athanasius, and who knows where it's going to go because, we're both lucid this week. So it's 183 degrees below zero and only getting colder. So that's Christopher Gillespie, just waiting patiently.
Yeah, in the background, chilling and willing, maxing and relaxing. Merry Christmas in the morning.
That's right. And I'm Donovan Riley. Before we get too much further, that last episode, when that coffee kicked in the last episode, I was just a dog off the leash. So I apologize to everybody for gobbling up most of the time on that podcast.
No, I don't know. I mean, I listened to it again because I saw your comment. I still think we were being pretty gentle. And,
okay, good.
Yeah. No, I don't think it was overly aggressive, and I got my words
aggressive. I was just talking a lot, more than even normal, because I was so
angry. But when it's that topic of the form and content of preaching that kind of
sets me off. Yeah,
it does. Yeah,
that's true. Right? There's certain triggers. If you know a person's triggers, you want to basically just send the conversation in a direction.
Right.
Just drop that one.
Right. And it was such a great example of, lack of first order discourse. I forgot what the term was, but now I remember.
Yeah,
right. I mean, it's just discourse. Like if you're only whatever it is, second order, I guess, right?
Yeah,
when you're just going to talk about things, and you're never going to get to the for you, the first order. Like this matters,
right?
It's like especially Christmas. I mean, of all the times, right?
Right.
It's like
born
unto you this day is the Savior, right?
Like we were talking about backstage. Once you meet someone, it doesn't take too long before you figure out whether or not this is someone you want to invest more time in.
Right.
You don't need 6 years to make up your mind. Well, 3 to 6 months, but it's the same with churches. Attend a church for 3 to 6 months. Give yourself time to learn the personality and the dynamics of the congregation and whether the preacher is moving from second to first order discourse, does he deliver Jesus Christ for you for the forgiveness of sins? Is he about the gifts?
Mm-hmm.
Does he catechize when he teaches in Bible study? Give it 3 to 6 months, because pastors can go through seasons where they're not at their best or brightest.
Right.
Congregations also. Sometimes you walk in a February, for example, in the upper Midwest. You come to church in February in the upper Midwest, pre-Lent, pre-Easter. It's cold. Everyone's just kind of gritting their teeth because
If
of the
they're
weather
there
and
at
the
all.
season, if they're there at all.
Yeah.
Same thing in the summer, though, too. You come in the
Yep.
summer and you say, wow, this congregation's dead. It's like, yeah in the summer, because everyone goes on vacation from church. But come during Advent and Lent, and you'd think it was a different congregation.
Right.
And then you come, you come for Lent or Easter, and there's 100, 200, 300 people in church. Then you come back the following Sunday or come back in a month, and now there's 45 people. It's like, what happened? It's the weave and the weft of our congregation. It's the dynamic of life in this church.
Yeah.
And same thing with preaching, same thing with worship, but also then theologically, when you're engaged with theology regularly, and then by theology, I mean reading the Bible, thinking about questions of faith, reading your catechism, talking with other Christians, whatever it might be.
Or non-Christians.
Or non-Christians.
Maybe.
This time of year. You're going to have great conversations. And then sometimes you're just going to sit there and it's just going to be silent.
Well, and I know you've seen examples of this, and it's kind of trite. Just, when the person says Happy Holidays to say Merry Christmas and then see what happens. But I mean, that is being actually a theologian, is it not?
It actually is, yeah, because you're making a confession.
Right, and you can tell where they're coming from if they kind of perk up and they're like, oh yeah, Merry Christmas, you know. It's like, call the thing what it is, right? The celebration of Christ's birth. This is what we do right now.
Well, to your point, that happened to me. I've talked about it before. When I was in the hospital on Christmas Eve in 2020, everybody comes in, emptying the trash. Hey, have a good evening, blah, blah, blah. Nurse comes in, push the button if you need anything. I'll be right outside. And then I just got frustrated. I'm like, this is so stupid. They're not. I could tell that they wanted to say something. You can tell from their body language. So I just started saying Merry Christmas, and they'd brighten up and immediately go Merry Christmas to you too. And then they came in the room the next time, the third, the fourth, the fifth time. We started having conversations with each other. So by by Christmas morning, I knew the names of everybody that was working my room.
Yeah, and these weren't surface level conversations anymore.
No, and I discovered, again, I talked about that, right? I'm feeling sorry for myself. I'm like, I'm in the hospital. It's Christmas Eve, and I can't be with my family, blah, blah. Oh, God, why would you do this to me? And then turns out that some of my nurses had actually switched shifts with people. They were Christians. And rather than go to church on Christmas, they switched a shift with someone else so that person could be at home with their family for Christmas. And I'm like, oh, that's why I'm here, because I needed a preacher on Christmas.
Right. Yeah. And this is on being a theologian of the cross, which, having to work in a hospital on Christmas is, it's either going to do that or it's going to be the opposite.
Right,
You're going to be in despair. And yeah.
But my mom and I talked about this when we were doing our Bible study on Ezekiel yesterday as well, to kind of segue into the Incarnation here with Athanasius, is that if a foreign military were to, let's say Canada, the Canadian military were to invade, and they come to my house and they take.
You mean the UN, the blue helmets?
Yeah, the blue helmet people who represent Canada, or vice versa, the Chinese
or China.
Yeah,
I'm confused.
I'm confused too. It's a smorgasbord up there, and if they were to carry me and my family away and then imprison us and enslave us in Saskatchewan, and we would say as a family, God, why have you done this? Why would you do this to us? We're slaves. I'm not allowed to preach. We're not allowed to practice our religion. We're all oppressed. We have to work 24/7, 7 days a week. We sleep on dirt floors. We eat the leftovers that they give to the animals. Lord, how could you do this to us? We think this is like we're cursed. This is God's punishment. God's abandoned us. Meanwhile, what we don't know is that the entire city that I live in was burned to the ground and all the people were killed. And then God brings us back after 7 years and says to us, this land is now all your land, all of it. And you're going to build a new people and a new community, and it's going to be my people, and this is going to be my church. What we thought was the worst thing that could have happened to us, and God had abandoned us, was actually a mercy. That was actually grace, that God would save us by taking us away into slavery while he destroyed those who worship false gods and practiced
that's what I was going to say. You walk in and you'd be like, this church looks kind of nice. I know there's an idol up there, but we'll just take that down and put the cross up instead. Right. And you're like, maybe you didn't actually get rid of all the idolatry when you inherited that building, or that space.
It's especially for us as sinners, then the old Adam, everything's upside down and backwards for us. This is in Luther's Heidelberg Disputations, where he talks about a theologian of the cross calling a thing what it is, what a theologian of glory calls good evil and evil good, is that we're all theologians of glory by nature. We're born this way. So when God does something good for us, we call it evil, whether you hit the lottery or he takes you away into slavery. And then when God does something, good for us, we call that evil. But then when something evil does happen, like we hit the lottery and all of a sudden cousins that we never knew existed come out of the woodwork, and we end up having to get divorced because our wife turns on us or our husband, and the government takes most of it. Yeah. And the dog gets hit by a truck, we're like, God, how could you curse me this way with this money? Meanwhile, all these poor people are sitting over here saying, we'll take it. We'll take it. It's very dangerous for us as Christians to take a moral stance outside of what the Bible says, that God is good and everything that is not of God is evil or wicked. So there is no moral category of good and evil that you then don't have to correct by saying, okay, but God, Emmanuel, the God who is with us is good. So why are we calling that what over there good or evil when we're not using God's word to judge it? And this is why when Jesus is born, no one really cares. No one listens. No one pays attention. It's just another birth.
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not that they don't care. No one listens. It's just that it's ordinary.
Right. It's somebody else that's poor is having a baby.
Well, Mary's having a kid. Yeah. Right. We're not so sure about the
father.
Yeah. Actually, that may not have been as uncommon as we.
Oh, I guarantee you it wasn't.
I know. I don't want to make light of that because obviously it's a big deal for Joseph. Right.
Well, obviously. It's a big deal for everybody, probably.
Right. I mean, the parentage of Jesus is important. But still, it's like, yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of cousins, and, these things happen.
Right. And so coming to the Incarnation, then, to your point, right, as I've said many times, teen pregnancy is normal. It's just not good. It's always been normal. Well, actually, teen pregnancy was normal because you were an adult when you were 12, so...
Isn't that interesting? Yeah. I mean, even our language is like corrupted. It's like, no, you were already married, commonly.
Oh, yeah. Like if you were 51 back in that day, like you were celebrated. Like whatever wisdom has gotten you this far in life, you're ancient.
Yeah.
Like
those
Luther
are
was
the matriarchs
of
the 50-year-olds. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're like, whatever experience and wisdom you can bequeath to us at this point, because you've obviously survived, like we need it, man. Whereas, now today, when are you actually considered wise? Never. Like wisdom in our culture is almost dead, actually, if we use pre-modern definitions of wisdom, which is experience based on a lifetime of failure.
Right, but we don't actually engage in experience.
Right.
We delay experience.
Like we were talking about backstage too, of like not only is guilt no longer corporate, but wisdom isn't corporate. That's the thing too, right? You'd have a wise man, not only a tribal wise man, but at the court in the Middle Ages there'd be a chair in the corner in the king's court for the old guy, the wise man, right?
Well, even in the Old Testament scriptures, I mean, they're sitting at the gate, or they're sitting at they're sitting on they're sitting on the steps of the temple in Acts, right? You see that with Solomon.
Whereas I think today we don't see that because it's all about your credentials.
And then Paul to Timothy is like, or is it is it Timothy or Titus? Well, it doesn't matter. Maybe both, right? With the older women, giving their wisdom to the younger women. It's like, well, how's that going to happen unless you guys are actually engaging in conversation with one another? Yeah. Or it's more than conversation. It's actually life.
It's community,
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
it's strange, even to me, every time I go back to Mexico and I see 3 generations living in the same house.
Right.
I still have to stop and go, oh, no, that's actually the way it's supposed to be.
Here we mock it, but...
Right. It's like, why would I move my mother-in-law in with me? Well, because
and we don't even want to live next door to our folks, which doesn't make any sense either.
Right. Yeah, down the street is too close. It's like we got to live in a different city or state or country.
I mean, I don't have a problem with mobility, in kind of a just it's a neutral thing, except for it can also be used for great ill.
Well,
driving people apart.
Before we get too far off on this tangent, but I'll put this to you because you'll understand it better than I do right now. Is a consequence of the family being eroded in our culture is why children, when they get to 18, 19, 20, 21, they go so far away from home. Versus for you and I, because we homeschool and we put such an emphasis on the bonds of family and that When your mom and I are gone, the only person you're going to be able to call who's going to be there for you is one of your siblings, because they know you better than anybody.
Right.
So don't wait until you're in your 20s to build that bond with them, because then it's too late. You have to do it now while you're still living together at home. And
I don't even know if you have to emphasize that if you're already living that way.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that also then is that, because Annie and I are so hypochondriac about failed families, because we come from two failed families. So we're hypochondriacs about this. So yes, it's a both and I'm sure our kids just get fed up with it, because we're all about it. But then when I see my kids buying Christmas presents for each other without us saying anything, I'm just like, oh, like there.
Right, exactly.
And so is it the case that it's not that the kids want to run as far away from home as possible because they just want to be their own person, versus it's a cultural phenomenon that it's anathema to want to live near your parents, first of all. And not only to want to live near your parents, but to bring your future spouse to the family. And you actually make those decisions as a family.
Right.
Versus, hey, this is my husband or wife, now accept it. Right? And if you don't, we're never going to come home again.
Well, and like you and I have both experienced, within our congregations, it's like, when the girl comes home from college with her girlfriend.
Yeah.
They're like, and the parents are like, what happened?
Right.
Like, well, your kid was at college.
Right. Where were you?
Right.
And
Did you even go on weekends and help, take them to church or,
Right. Right.
No. Well, no, they're adults now. What?
Which means what? That they're no longer in your life? It's all...
You're no longer responsible for them, or what? What are you talking about?
Right, exactly. But this then, to segue into the...
I'm pushing back against the Christmas story, right? Where it's like, there's no room in the guest room, right? It's not because the town is over full. Well,
right.
Actually, it could be, right? Because everybody of the town of David is there in town. I mean, it's a big family gathering.
But it's not a room. It's the guest room.
Right. And so... but the presumption that the family is rejecting them.
100%.
I mean, it is possible. I mean, but the narrative doesn't explicitly say that.
Why did they have to flee to Egypt, though? Why did they have to flee in the middle of the night? Why did they not find... I mean, he's from that city. Yeah. His family's there.
It is interesting that they didn't shelter him or protect him. Yeah. Right. And so maybe it's assumed. Maybe you can assume it from the text.
Sure.
But not necessarily, right? I mean...
It's sanctified speculation. I think it's more...
It is a reflection of how Jesus is received later on.
That's what I'm saying, too.
You're projecting backwards.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I don't really care if it was a cave or a house or a barn. That's not the point. The point is, the more important point to me is, why did he end up in wherever he ended up being born? Why wasn't there a home for him?
Well, I suppose maybe this is the way you do it then. So a prophet's not received in his own hometown, right. Jesus says, right?
Yes. Right.
Can anything good come from Nazareth? They're careful to remind us of that.
Yes.
But also he says, who are my mothers and brothers and sisters and
those
whatnot?
Those who are here with me, right?
Yeah, that's those who are with me, right? So again, you're speculating a little bit, a lot of it, but it does seem as if he came to his own and his own did not receive him, right?
Right, exactly, right.
Just to quote something there.
And and the point is too, it's not a aha revelation that he says that. All we have to do is read scriptures. Every time God comes to his own people, going back to Genesis 3,
right?
Like, we hid because we thought you were coming to kill us.
Well, and you have to imagine. I was thinking about this with the shepherds. They come, and they see, they find him as the angel said, which is okay, and then they go and tell other people about it,
right?
But he wasn't anything to look at, right? Oh, there's a baby born, and why are the shepherds going around? And they're all like, "What is this?" They wonder at it, right? They're like, "We don't know what he's talking about. Christ the Lord is born, and it's Mary and Joseph's kid." Like,
right.
So then they ponder these things. That's what it says.
Right.
That's what Luke says. And like, meaning they're like, we don't have any idea what's going on here.
Just do it yourself. You can do it. Just go out and randomly tell people that God is at your church. Not like
that's exactly where I went with this. This is my sermon idea.
Okay.
Yeah, but you're right with me on this.
Go tell your neighbor. God actually appeared at our church. He's physically in our church right now. And I'm going to see him. Now watch your neighbor look at you like you need to be locked up and put on medication.
Yeah. I go up to the altar and the glory of the Lord surrounds me and the angels sing with me.
Yes.
And they're like, what are you talking about?
Right.
That sounds kind of
hokey.
What kind of stuff are you burning in there? You 100%. Burning incense? What kind of incense is that?
You know what though? That's the reason you'll hear a lot of atheists accuse Christians of basically believing in nonsense, fairy tales. Because we say things like that. and you and I actually believe it.
It's not metaphorical. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
We don't
Whereas
think it's
like,
metaphorical anyway.
Are you deluded or just in flight from reality? It's like, no, like it's as real as it gets because there's the overlap. So to that point then, 4 years ago, apparently, when we first started this show, we read this. I had forgotten. This is a...
How could you forget?
How? I forgot that I built a website from scratch with my partner when I was doing
actually,
my PhD work.
Banned Books, episode number 1, C.S. Lewis, Introduction to Incarnation.
It was the first episode we ever did? I thought it was 4. Okay.
And then we did 2 episodes on Athanasian on the Incarnation.
Oh, okay. There we go.
Nope. No, not 2, not 3. How many did we do? 4 episodes on the Incarnation, the actual text.
Okay. Very
where
cool.
we talked about Elmore Leonard, High Noon, Peaky Blinders, Justified.
So the same things we're still talking about. Feedback loop.
So March 19th, 2018 was the last time we looked at this.
Cool. So much like Peaky Blinders and Justified, I read this every year and watch. Although this year I'm going to mix it up. I'm not watching Die Hard this year. I'm going to watch Lethal Weapon, well, it's Shane Black, first of all, and it's a Christmas movie. Because all of Shane Black's movies are set at Christmas. Although Kiss Kiss Bang Bang is a definite, strong second, possibly first replacement for Die Hard.
Okay.
Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, that was Robert Downey Jr.'s first movie that he did after he got out of rehab. And it's kind of film noirish.
Okay.
And then Val Kilmer plays the co-main character. It's a great movie. It's so good. It's kind of like The Nice Guys, if you've ever seen that movie with Ryan Gosling and Russell Crowe.
Then you're so easily gotten off onto tangents here.
Sorry, it's Friday. It's literally 40 below zero here with like 40-mile-an-hour winds. And
I just looked. We're at -7, so.
Nice. Good for you. Well, enjoy your future. It's coming. But anyways, to the point. Actually leave a comment what you watch for your Christmas movie, because also A Muppet Christmas Carol. Everybody's got that's the best version.
It is it is. I know it's kind of cliche to say so, but it is the best adaptation. And I have like 7 or 8 now. I mean, I like the Patrick Stewart one.
Yeah. I like the George C. Scott one myself because I love George C. Scott.
Yeah, George C. Scott's good. That was a good one too.
But the old black and white one that we used to watch in school. That's a great one.
I think I have it. I just can't remember.
That one's spooky.
Is that Alistair? What's his name?
Yes, Alistair Cook. Was it
something
Alistair
like
Cook
that?
or something like that?
Yeah.
Not Alistair Crowley. No.
I almost said it. I'm like,
that's a different ghost.
Well, I mean, there is some ghosts in it. I mean, it does get a little weird.
Alistair Cook. Anyways, that's a great one. That's definitely a spooky one because black and white, long shadows is great. There's so many though. But yeah, the Muppet one's the best. It really is. I guess
because it gets the whimsical of it, whimsical nature of it.
Yeah. Well, and it's short, and Michael Caine kills it.
Try not to get you onto a tangent about what constitutes a Christmas movie, but there you go.
There we go. So, Athanasius on the Incarnation by C.S. Lewis, commented on by Gillespie and Riley. What could be better? We're incepting.
Wonderful Life is propaganda, man. Talk about communist propaganda.
And my wife's favorite Christmas movie is Godfather. She just reminded me, which is not a Christmas movie, but
it's a baptism movie.
It is a baptism movie, for sure, and about sacrificial blood.
The wrong kind of baptism.
In that sense, it makes it an Easter movie.
Baptism by fire.
That's my wife in a nutshell. This sweet, raised in the Lutheran church, meek little girl that I dated, woman, sorry. And then we start watching movies because she lived a very sheltered life. And she saw The Sopranos and The Godfather, and she's like, I love this. I'm like, really? All this violence and stuff? She's like, yeah, I love it. I'm like, that should have been a tip-off.
Dark.
Should have been
very
an omen.
dark.
She's very dark. Yeah. She kicks puppies sometimes just to laugh. It's horrific.
But she's yours.
But she's mine. Who do you think brings her the puppies? So, that being said, Introduction to St. Athanasius on the Incarnation, C.S. Lewis. There is a strange idea abroad that in every subject the ancient books should be read only by the professionals, and that the amateur should content himself with the modern books. Thus I have found, as a tutor in English literature, that if the average student wants to find out something about Platonism, The very last thing he thinks of doing is to take a translation of Plato off the library shelf and read the Symposium. Well, there you go, Antonio.
That's what we were talking about. See?
We were talking about that before we hit record.
So we broke our rules. There it is.
There it is. C.S. Lewis corrected us. I don't agree with him, but I appreciate what he's saying.
Well, you can do it in parallel, right?
You could, yeah.
Read the original, read a commentary.
And then read a commentary at the same time, exactly.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Annotated commentaries are the best.
Yep, there you go.
He would rather read some dreary modern book 10 times as long about isms and influences and only once in 12 pages telling him what Plato actually said. The error is rather an amiable one, for it springs from humility. The student is half afraid to meet one of the great philosophers face to face. Well, if it's Nietzsche, it's kind of frightening.
Mm-hmm.
He feels himself. Did you know Plato was a pancration fighter? I think we talked about that at one point. But Plato,
no, we have.
Plato's not his actual name. Plato actually means broad-chested or plate.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And he actually writes about the fact that on weekends, that's what he would do for fun. He would go fight.
He was a fighter.
Basically, yeah. Which kind of makes me appreciate
now
the
you mentioned Nietzsche.
science of Platonism.
You mentioned Nietzsche and being I think I found this to be the case. Is intense writers necessarily they're not necessarily that way in person.
No, they're very gentle actually.
Yeah. So that's the writing might be a little. Well, you're actually a pretty good example of this. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can actually get along with somebody in person, but when you read it, sometimes it's a little aggressive, right?
Yeah, there you go.
A little intense. You're a little intense.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a jujitsu meme, like how I make friends. Hey, you want to beat me up?
Right. And so that's what he's arguing here is you might be, you think you're going to be afraid of him because it's going to be all this high and lofty talk.
Right.
Some of that's just a communication difference, right? I imagine that's the way with the founding fathers, right, of the country. Right. And like you read it and they're totally Cicero dialogue method.
Yeah.
But they would go to the pub and drink. So
exactly.
I imagine we could have just a perfectly normal conversation with them about the weather or something.
To his point too, though, when you read Plato's dialogues, it's actually really easy to understand the conversation.
Oh, the dialogues especially. Yeah.
Because the dialogues are easy. Reading Aristotle is actually more difficult because you're just reading this guy go off on different direct tangents and stuff. And it's like, I kind of follow, but start talking about aeons and logos and stuff. But Plato's dialogues, because they're just two or three guys arguing a point. And the one guy, usually Socrates or somebody, is just, it's like Job's friends, basically, is what it comes down to.
Right. But it's not, there's a sense that it's actually relevant or practical even. Yeah. Right. Whereas, just abstract, incarnation is a good topic on this. I know he's going to get to that because I remember this now, but is it just an abstract idea or does it actually matter?
Right.
Which is one of my sermons this week.
Lastly, for me, the hubris of the academy is also a part of this. Mm-hmm. The arrogance of the academy.
Where they're intentionally obfuscate using language so that you can't get access to what they're talking about?
Well, I don't think they do it on purpose. Some do, actually. I've met some of them. But most it's just because this is their whole focal point of their life. And therefore, everything gets funneled. It's like me in jiu-jitsu. Like, I have to self-censor to not talk about jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. And make every conversation about MMA because that's all I want to talk about outside of art and literature right now. So it's like I'm very narrow in my view on that point. So you start talking about theology and then I start segueing into these other topics.
Right.
And you get lost and you don't realize every genre has its own jargon, its own rhetoric. And you're talking in shorthand, but the person you're talking to doesn't understand what you're saying because they're not a part of this academy, this gym, this genre. But you're so used to talking to other people that talk the same language. Like with theology, actually. You and I have talked about this on the show of, if we talk in Lutheranese, kind of shorthand for our Lutheran denominational history and all this, the kind of ecosystem we live in currently, a lot of people even other Lutherans won't have any idea what we're talking about.
And what's incredible about that for me is most of our Lutheran dialogue is, it's heavily Pauline and Jesus, right?
Yeah, you would hope.
So we're just borrowing scriptural language. Mm-hmm. and we're using the big words that the Bible itself uses, which
Sure.
then means what's happening in your church that you're not actually using these words
Sure.
that are given to us
Right.
by the Scripture and defining them.
Well, and there's the catechetical aspect of
Right,
this too.
right.
then.
That's what we're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yes, I do actually think it's good to find good companion volumes to philosophers and theologians, but don't let that then determine for you how you read. It's like you and I talk about. Take a black marker and cross out all the subheadings in the Bible.
The
Take away
commentary.
all the chapter headings. Stop letting the editors tell you, well, this is actually going to be about the baptism of Jesus. Now all you're focused on is the baptism. You're not paying attention to the guy over there that's commented on or what John is saying. And just read the text. And then after the fact, go listen to other people.
Right.
But understand that that's their commentary too.
I pointed this out at the congregation this morning that the response of the shepherds to witnessing the birth of Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
It actually is repeated throughout Luke's gospel, but you wouldn't know it unless you read continue reading in the book.
Right.
Blind Bartimaeus responds the same way, right? The 10 lepers, they respond the same way, right?
Yeah.
They marvel, they give glory to God, right? And sometimes they give thanks, like in the lepers, and they go and tell other people.
Right.
It's like the shepherds are just setting up the pattern of the reception of God's word in the life of the Christian. This is what you do, right? You give thanks, you give glory, and you go and tell others. I mean, it's like
it's very simple.
but it's all throughout. Even the centurion at the cross does the same thing, except he doesn't go and tell anybody. But eventually, Luke finds out.
Right.
Anyway.
So jumping forward a couple sentences, the simplest student will be able to understand, if not all, yet a very great deal of what Plato said. But hardly anyone can understand some modern books on Platonism. It has always, therefore, been one of my main endeavors as a teacher to persuade the young that first-hand knowledge, ad fontes, go to the primary texts, is not only more worth acquiring than secondhand knowledge, but is usually much easier and more delightful to acquire. This mistaken preference for the modern books and this shyness of the old ones is nowhere more rampant than in theology. Wherever you find a little study circle of Christian laity, you can be almost certain that they are studying not St. Luke or St. Paul or St. Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or Hooker or Butler, but Berdyaev or Maritain or Niebuhr or Sayers or even myself. Yeah.
And he's not discounting the modern commentary. It's just saying in terms of priority.
Right.
Do you read the original or you read the commentary?
I thought it was amazing when I became a pastor that when I got to my congregation and we started talking about what kind of Bible study they wanted to do with me as their new pastor, nobody brought up a book of the Bible.
That's right. I knew where you were going.
Nobody. And so I said, well, what if we do a Bible study on the Bible without someone telling us what the Bible says? Let's just read it. And it was, again, remarkable that everyone in the room was stunned by that statement. And I realized then in that moment, looking at their faces, they'd never, or at least not in recent history, actually just read the Bible and just said, hey, what does God have to say to us here?
There's a particular irony to be in a church of the Reformation and yet to actually have reverted back to the very reason why the Reformation had to happen, which is that people weren't reading primary source. They were reading, even the theologians, they were reading, Lombard sentences or something, and not actually just reading, I don't know, the Gospels.
Right, exactly.
If they even could, that's a whole nother aspect to that. Right. But I think we are sliding very quickly into a kind of illiteracy where we can't even read primary stuff anymore.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we don't have just reading comprehension or even listening comprehension, even if somebody read it to you.
Right.
Right. We can't maintain a kind of attentiveness for and listen for detail that would bring both edify us but also bring us joy.
We talked about that in regards to, like, in the late 1800s in the Old West, as we call it. It was actually kind of a sign of virtue that you knew big words and used big words in sentences.
Right.
And even if you watch certain Westerns, they'll kind of make fun of that because they'll use the word in the wrong context. But there was a time, and this is very recently, where it was normal and expected for men to have memorized poetry.
Right.
Like that was actually a thing that was considered virtuous. Like to be a manly man was to memorize at least one or two poems and be able to recite poems. Same thing.
Like the Rime of the Mariner or something like that.
Something.
Yeah.
Right? Osmandius, whatever. William Blake, Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright. But like now, like we can't even get people to like appreciate that stuff. And it's only been really in the last generation or two, like I've talked about before, where like we used to have poets and authors who would show up at every national event with some reading or some poem they had written for that moment. And they were literally looked upon as like a prophet, as a preacher, and they're supposed to sum up the feelings and thoughts of everyone in the nation in like 16 verses. And we just like, Maya Angelou's at the Capitol for the inauguration. Of course she is.
Right.
Whereas now, when a poet, I guess you pointed this out, that there was a poet at the Biden inauguration. I had no idea.
Yeah, and she was terrible.
Well, it's not even...
It wasn't even good poetry.
Right.
She was just young, so that's why. And a person of color. Yes. No, and I know it's kind of Luddite to just blame this on motion picture, and then television and programming, and especially since I find I take great joy in those medium. Yeah. But I recognize that they do kill the imagination.
Right.
In a way that the spoken word or even recorded audio doesn't. Mm-hmm. Right. It's that there's something about giving you the visual representation that kills the possibility of it ever expanding. Right. Right. And it's grossly limited. And it's like being spoon-fed in another way, right? It's almost more juvenile. It
does something to your brain for sure, because what I've been talking about more and more now is like when I came back from San Diego from the 1517 conference, came back from Mexico in October, I stopped playing video games.
Yeah.
Because I had started writing again in Mexico very seriously. And I thought to myself, rather than in the times that I usually sit down and play video games, I'm going to use that time to write and see what happens. And again, to your point then, like my imagination just flowered. It just opened up.
It wasn't that it wasn't there. It was just being repressed.
Exactly. Because the thing about creating art is it's a process. It's time consuming. Whereas I could just play a video game and just pick it up and just bang, 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 and get that constant dopamine hit, right? Whereas the dopamine hit when you're in the creative process, like, even with editing, for example, like you get a dopamine hit when you get to the end of all of your edits and you listen back to it and you go, that's it.
Yeah.
But in the midst of all that, you're not really that high because it's drudgery sometimes to have to go through the work of creating something and bringing this to fruition. Whereas like with a movie or a TV show, there's no work.
Well, but it is like Jesus said with giving birth. I know we're men and we don't have any understanding of these things. Okay, fine.
Hey, I've had colds.
But the idea, I mean, the pain, knowing that the birth is to come, but then after the birth happens, the joy for the child that's been born into the world, right? Yeah. So that is like the quintessential creative process right there.
Yeah. Right.
The original creative process. Yeah.
And like what you were saying about art, instead of like movies and TV and so forth being a tool that we use, it's just come to use us now. That's why you see celebrity worship in the last century, is that once we saw people that were 60 feet tall on the screen, we started to worship them as gods.
Well, it's almost, we've talked about this with like superhero movies. I mean, I don't know that we can really have any more for a generation, probably.
Right, they're dead.
If even
it's
longer.
Like Westerns. Westerns went through this. World War II movies
it just got so overwrought and repetitive that they just...
Well, they're out of ideas, and the people they're bringing in are uncreative and untalented.
Right, but you can almost exhaust the idea anyway.
Sure.
Like once you've done the whole cinematic universe, phase 1, 2, 3, then you're just kind of like, okay, now what? And people grow tired of it too.
Well, you see that when, especially nowadays with Gen X, that like that article came out that's been making the rounds that the majority of toys are bought by adults, Gen Xers. Like we're keeping the entire toy industry afloat right now.
You saw that they're doing a sequel on Netflix to that 70s show, but it's that 90s show. It's the grandkids.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's like
it's not
how much can you pull on that nostalgia, thread before it just completely
Right.
unravels.
Well, that's what I was going to say is that's the thing now is nostalgia. We're going to play into nostalgia. So we're going to remake all these movies. We're going to rebuild all these franchises.
Mm-hmm.
And one, you don't appreciate the zeitgeist. Two, you don't appreciate the chemistry. It's like listening back on a great album from the 70s.
Well, you're not a 12-year-old boy anymore.
That
I mean,
too. There's that too. But I'm just saying, like, there's a certain, like, all of these elements have to come together and coalesce for that thing to happen at that time for you, like the Star Wars trilogy.
Sure.
And you can't recreate that. It's like my kids with Harry Potter. Like, that's their benchmark. And you can never recapture that. That's why my kids, they've read the Magical Beasts books. They've watched the first 2 movies, but just because they were there. But as far as they're like, yeah, I don't need to go beyond. I don't care about the universe.
Well, it's kind of like the Lord of the Rings trilogy and then the Hobbit
Yeah.
series. Just, you know, it just kind of fell flat.
Yeah.
Never mind, it was like exaggerated. too.
Dumpster fire. Well, and that was actually the studio's fault.
No, but I don't know. See, I don't actually agree with that. I think it's a really different kind of delivery. But now it's like, no, we're all just like, we don't need any more Lord of the Rings fantasy.
Right.
Visually anyway.
Yes, 100%.
Like you could have a
too.
game, you could have audio, you could have some audio. I mean, you could do all sorts of other kind of medium, but the visual media is just like, it's been drawn out.
How about we read it? And use
Right.
our
So I've been thinking about
imagination?
this because I know we're getting off a tangent here, but you asked about Christmas movies. And what's interesting when I was thinking about like, what are people's favorite
This is gonna be a 2-hour
Christmas movies?
episode, by the way, folks.
Is that really almost no Christmas movie actually deals with the Christmas story.
Correct. That's right.
Right. And I think that, but I think that's good. But it does deal with the kind of conflicts that are within the Christmas story. So like family conflict, like we were talking about earlier.
There's only one person that could do it right, and that's Mel Gibson.
Yeah, but even then I don't watch the Passion movie.
I know. I'm just saying, though, that if you wanted somebody who's willing to at least go there and take serious.
I know there are nativity movies, but nobody lists them.
No.
And not because they're terrible or anything like that. It's just like the story is evocative on its own. And I think we inherently don't want the film to intrude on our memories of not only our nostalgic memories of celebrating Christmas, but even on the text itself. Sure. Because of that limiting factor, it limits the possibility
I'll give you an
of
example. When I talk about Gandalf, to go back to that example, when I say Gandalf, what does his voice sound like to you? Most people would say it sounds like Ian McKellen. He sounds like Magneto. Not for me, because I grew up with the Ralph Bakshi version of The Hobbit,
the animated
cartoon. That's John Ford, the famous director, who did the voice of Gandalf. So I actually cancel out Ian McKellen's voice with the voice I grew up hearing coming out of Gandalf's mouth in the cartoon. And so for me, Ian McKellen is Gandalf because I saw that. But at the same time, when I'm reading the book, I hear John Ford's voice. I hear that voice. That's his voice to me. And so that's the thing, though, is like, again, it's like Aragorn is always then Viggo Mortensen because he just killed it.
He nailed it. Yeah, he nailed it.
And so when you read the book, that's who you see. You see Viggo.
No,
Versus when I read something like, I don't know, Beowulf, for example, that like the Beowulf movies I've watched are so forgettable that I'm still free to kind of replace Beowulf with my imaginary character, right? Which is usually based on some famous artist painting of it. But, every generation does that. And as a consequence, when, to segue back into the text, that the incarnation for us has become so disembodied that we're much, to your point, we are much more emotionally involved in the feelings of the season that are almost wholly manufactured by stores and the industry of Christmas.
And really recent, too.
Yes, 100%.
Like you're talking about 70, 80 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Basically, the American Christian experience it was manufactured by
Macy's and
what was I say? Fifth Avenue, right?
Fifth
Isn't that
Avenue.
yeah. That's where the agencies were.
Yes. Yeah, it's all to get people to stop and window shop and then go in the store.
That's post World War II.
Yeah, all of it. So that being said, then, it's the sentiment. I actually addressed this in my sermon to a certain extent. It's like you come to church on Christmas Eve and you're all looking at me expecting me to say something. That's my job tonight, is to say something to you people. And that, and I use that as an excuse to segue into the Emmanuel story. But it is that, for the pastor, we're there saying, okay, there's a lot of pressure to get this right. And not like to make the congregation happy on Christmas Eve, but rather to not betray the text and to not wander away from the text and just, again,
It's very much a textual holiday. Yes.
Yes, exactly. Like Good Friday and Easter.
Correct.
But yet I think it's very easy to lose your grip on it because there's so much freight packed on it. Thousands of years and all of the expectations, and not only of the people in the church, but just of generations piled on top of that stuff.
But yet in the first 4 or 5 centuries, at least, for the most part, depends on where you are.
Yeah.
They don't even seem to be all that regular or consistent in even how or when they celebrate Christmas.
Right. Yeah. In a weird way, consumerism has used Christmas to hijack not only the birth of Christ, but the resurrection of Christ.
Well, time as well.
Yeah.
Just your time and,
Right. Yeah, unto us a child is born is actually not a confession of Christmas. It's a confession for all time.
I've been thinking about this too, is the way that you call it secular culture, but I think it's more statist. Co-op church holidays, and then the churches co-op state holidays. And you're like, that's kind of backwards, right? It's like, I know we love it when our state protects our church holidays so that people can come on Christmas, right? Because they don't have to work or something.
Yeah.
But really, we'd rather them not have anything to do with it.
Yeah. Well, it also removes the onus from the individual Christian to say to their boss, I'm not coming to work today.
Correct.
If it's my faith versus my job, I can get another job.
Yeah, I mean, they've actually taken away the necessity of making a confession.
Correct. So, this whole thing, secondary sources, primary sources, the way that we stress the secondary over the primary, he says, this seems topsy-turvy to me. Naturally, since I myself am a writer, I do not wish the ordinary reader to read no modern books, but if he must read only the new or only the old, I would advise him to read the old. I agree. And I would give him this advice precisely because he is an amateur and therefore much less protected than the expert against the dangers of an exclusive contemporary diet.
Oh, talk about snobbery. Look at that.
A new book is still on its trial, and the amateur is not in a position to judge it. It has to be tested against the great body of Christian thought down the ages, and all its hidden implications, often unsuspected by the author himself, have to be brought to light.
Oh, that's actually a really good criticism. Because since we read this last time, we read Live Not by Lies, right?
Yeah.
Which was kind of a response to the fallout from the Benedict option,
Yes,
right? Who's the author? I'm forgetting his name now.
Dreyer.
Yeah, Rod Dreyer. Benedict option, it was pretty well received, yet there was a lot of pushback, right? After a while. It took a little bit after its popularity. And Live Not by Lies was kind of a response then. Well, how do you live within the world but not of the world, know? And so, but it's a good example of like, in the moment, people were really like, this is the best book ever. And then, over time, its importance has kind of waned.
Right.
Because recognize it wasn't an answer, especially since COVID. It didn't provide an answer to that kind of conflict.
Called being a slave to the moment. So one of those cliches, don't be a slave to the moment. And yeah, it's very easy to be a slave in the moment because something provokes such strong emotion in you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what he's also arguing for then is, the goal of an author, I would say, but certainly his goal, but, for us as readers is to find those books that do transcend the moment.
Right.
And become, what do they say? Timeless, right?
Yeah. So often, it cannot be fully understood without the knowledge of a good many other modern books. If you join at 11 o'clock a conversation which began at 8, you will often not see the real bearing of what is said. Remarks which seem to you very ordinary will produce laughter or irritation, and you will not see why. The reason, of course, being that the earlier stages of the conversation have given them a special point. In the same way, sentences in a modern book which look quite ordinary may be directed at some other book. In this way, we do this in tweets now. We used to say blog, but now it's just tweets, which is pretty soon it'll just be grunts. In this way, we should invent a social media platform called Grunt.
Grunting.
You're only allowed to post monosyllabic words. No punctuation, no clauses, phrases, sentences, just one words. Only a word.
We're going to literally devolve into beasts. Okay.
100%. Yeah. And then we'll have we'll evolve away from grunt to just grunt 2.0, where you're not even allowed to make words, just emojis.
There's so much could be said there, but I'm going to avoid it.
Trademark Donovan Riley 2022. So you can be led to accept what you would have indignantly rejected if you knew its real significance. That is that sentence. The only safety is to have a standard of plain central Christianity, mere Christianity as Baxter called it, which puts the controversies of the moment in their proper perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Such a standard can be acquired only from the old books. We call that wisdom.
Yep.
It is a good rule after reading a new book never to allow yourself another new one till you have read an old one in between. If that's too much for you, you should at least read one old one to every 3 new ones.
I love how practical he is here. By the way, Mere Christianity, there's an argument made. It's a new book out,
Mm-hmm.
and it's from Lexham. I forget what it's called, but it argues that what Luther does with the small catechism
Mm-hmm.
is he's just articulating the rule of faith. He's saying here's what
Mm-hmm.
gives us the rule of faith. It's the chief text, right? So
Yeah.
it's the commandment, the creed, the prayer,
Right.
baptism, Lord's Supper, and absolution, according John 20, etc.
Right.
And if you know those things, and that becomes your conceptual framework for approaching the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
in a sense of rule of faith or mere Christianity,
Yeah.
then you can read other things critically, because you're like, well, wait a minute, but that's not what the Bible says about baptism, or
Yeah.
that's not what he says about the person or work of Jesus, right? Or it doesn't even. That's not really what the law says, right?
Mm-hmm.
In regards to murder or lust or
Right.
whatnot. Right. So if you have that, that's why we teach that to children. We call it catechesis. But it is the mere Christianity, the rule of faith. And that's why he's saying read the old books, because that's often
Right.
what they're providing or giving is like that knowledge, wisdom, intellectual framework to actually be able to read other things, and not in an ahistorical way.
It also
kinda-
allows you to
yeah.
engage in conversation with other people on the topic.
No, that's true too.
And depending on
outside your tradition too. Yeah.
Well, that too, but depending on what you're reading, there may be no one immediately near you to have this conversation with. And they're not interested in reading the book. They don't want to talk about it. They'll listen to you talk about it, but like we discussed previously, you're talking in a particular rhetoric, and you're using jargon that is not familiar to them. So they're listening out of politeness, but they can't follow and they can't have this conversation, versus you read other people who write about this person, this topic. Now you can engage in this conversation. I think this is why YouTube, for example, is so popular.
Oh yeah.
Because maybe a lot of the people I've found actually that I follow on YouTube, they actually have personality disorders. A lot of them, they're actually crippled by social anxiety, and so they don't interact with people. So they started their YouTube channel as a way to kind of like throw bottles out into the ocean and hope somebody answers. And
Yeah,
so
in a way that maybe like the written word wouldn't have.
Yeah.
So I mean, there is something, because you get the visual of on body language, right? That's how you know they have crippling social anxiety, because you
Yes,
can tell
right.
by the way they hold themselves in their video.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's just fascinating that you think to yourself, well, this amazing virtuoso guitarist is afraid to leave the house, or this amazing chef is afraid to even talk with local restaurateurs about getting a job at their restaurant, because they're just so overwhelmed by this anxiety or this, that, or the other thing. And this is their way of basically what Lewis is talking about with books. We can do this and go on YouTube to do it. Because like this is so indicative of the last 2.5 to 3 years, reaction channels, where you're watching something with other people who are watching something and commenting on it.
Yeah.
And comedy reaction channels are the best, because now you're laughing with other people, but they're not in the room with you, but you're sharing something kind of. It's a very weird thing, right? Because again, you can see them, but it's not incarnational, so therefore it's not personal.
Well, where it gets really weird, it's like the reaction videos to the reaction videos. And like it's meta levels, and you're like, and if you don't go back and get back to the original, you have no idea
Right.
like how did we get to this point? I'm not even sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, credit to the reactors for bringing back old music and books and stuff. So and movies. So they thought then, right, completely disposed. You have this, okay, every age having its own outlook. Next sentence or next paragraph, sorry. Every age has its own outlook. And so it's especially good at seeing certain truths and especially liable to make certain mistakes. Because I think the older I get, the more I just think that, and accept, I should say, I just accept it's impossible to not be a slave to the moment. Because that's literally all you exist in. There is no such thing as the future or the past. Those are all just ideas. So you are a slave to the moment. You can't live in the future, and you can't live in the past.
You can't recreate the past, no.
Right. And that's why nostalgia is such a cruel mistress. Because we all want to be that pristine age again where everything was wonderful and amazing and mysterious and just you were fascinated by it. But you can't recapture that. And that's, again, I think a lot of the frustration in pop culture today is Gen Xers in particular are just frustrated that they can't recapture those moments of their youth. And they're never coming back, no matter how much wine and Xanax you take.
Right. Well, and even if they did like the reunion tour or something like that, they're not the same. I like they're not raging against the machine anymore.
Right. Right.
Because that machine, well, they are the machine now.
They are the machine. Exactly. Right. Yeah. So that means you got to go to old books.
Mm-hmm.
All contemporary writers share to some extent the contemporary outlook, even those like myself who seem most opposed to it. Nothing strikes me more when I read the controversies of past ages than the fact that both sides were usually assuming without question a good deal, which we should now absolutely deny. They thought that they were as completely opposed as two sides could be. But in fact, they were all the time secretly united with each other and against earlier and later ages by a great mass of common assumptions. We may be sure that the characteristic blindness of the 20th century, the blindness about which posterity will ask, but how could they have thought that? Just wait. Lies where we have never suspected it and concern something about which there is untroubled agreement between Hitler and President Roosevelt or between Mr. H.G. Wells and Karl Barth. None of us can fully escape this blindness, but we shall certainly increase it and weaken our guard against it if we read only modern books.
Wow, we read this, again, March 2018. If only we had known what would happen end of 2019.
Right?
Into 2020.
Crazy.
I mean, because he's talking about books, but I mean, you can do this with everything. Like what happened, the same kind of snobbery or contemporary data was the only thing that was valid, right? And you couldn't look to any previous experience, say with, vaccination or masks or a flu epidemic or whatever. And like, we're sitting here like, why can't we refer to our past experience? You're like, no, because this is novel, right? This was a novel time,
novel virus, yes.
It's a novel virus, if you remember that conversation. And here it is. He's like, I was having a conversation with somebody about eugenics, right? Which I remember specifically when this happened to me, when I was reading an article and they pointed out, the mandatory sterilization campaigns in Minnesota, California, and Indiana, and other places in the 30s, and those scientists or 20s even, and those scientists were going to study here in the U.S. and then going back to Nazi Germany. And you're like, wait a minute. I was never taught this in school.
Right.
It's like, this because we don't read the old books. We don't actually see like, why don't we, well, that's if somebody wrote the book. So that makes me think of COVID. There are people who are writing the books. Right? Who are like, we have to, and they'll say this, we have to document what we experienced, whether it's, Scott Atlas working in the White House for 4 months or what's his name? Kennedy, right? RFK is like, here's everything I've learned through all my trials and, court cases and everything about this one person. You don't have to like him or hate him or love him, but here's what we know. Here's the real person. Based off, and you have to do that in a contemporary context, and then of course history will bear witness as to whether or not they were off the rocket. Of course, now we're thinking of the JFK assassination.
Well, when they admit it, we kind of orchestrated the whole thing.
Except they're still redacting it, even though Congress passed a law forcing them to release the unredacted records.
Just shows who's actually in charge.
Oh, you mean the CIA?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the only palliative is to keep the clean sea breeze of the centuries blowing through our minds. And this can be done only by reading old books. Not, of course, that there is any magic about the past. People were no cleverer than they are now. They made as many mistakes as we, but not the same mistakes.
There you go.
They will not flatter us in the errors we are already committing, and their own errors, being now open and palpable, will not endanger us. Oh, so reading old books isn't dangerous. They can't hurt us. Wow. What a radical thought. Two heads are better than one, not because either is infallible, but because they are unlikely to go wrong in the same direction.
As long as you're reading, yeah.
To be sure, the books of the future would be just as good a corrective as the books of the past. But unfortunately, we cannot get at them.
That's a nice rhetorical flair there.
Yeah.
It's like if we could read the future books, if we had quantum computing.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. Oops.
It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter?
Because no one
No,
wants
I
to
think
read.
you're...
No
No,
one's
but I
to
think
read.
you're right, though. I mean, everything is particular to the moment.
Yeah.
But the moment is always conditioned by the past.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
I like his encouragement here to say you're going to make your own mistakes, but if you're reading the old books, you're not going to make their mistakes necessarily, especially if you're listening to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right, which is what we've been trying to do on the show for 4 years,
Mm-hmm.
is to say, whether it's an old guy or a new guy, it's like, let's read this and let's, a lot of times we are pointing out errors in their writing or the way they're saying something, or maybe not, or in ourselves. That's right, where we've gone wrong, right? And and if you don't do, I guess somebody could do this. They could document the show, put it in writing. We could go back and read and see what we said. Try to learn from our own program.
Yeah.
But that's too heady. I don't know. And it would take too long.
It gives me shivers.
And to be able to filter through it and say, this is what's worth actually listening to. Well, that's a whole nother story.
Oh, yeah. No.
Welcome to the media of podcasting.
Yeah, no. So I myself was first led into reading the Christian classics, almost accidentally, as a result of my English studies. Some, such as Hooker, Herbert, Traherne, Taylor, and Bunyan, I read because they are themselves great English writers. Others, such as Boethius, Augustine, Aquinas, Dante, because they were influences. George MacDonald I had found for myself at the age of 16 and never wavered in my allegiance, although I tried for a long time to ignore his Christianity. They are, you will note, a mixed bag, representative of many churches, climates, and ages. And that brings me to yet another reason for reading them. The divisions of Christendom are undeniable and are by some of these writers most fiercely expressed. But if any man is tempted to think, as one might be tempted who read only contemporaries, that quote-unquote Christianity is a word of so many meanings that it means nothing at all, he can learn beyond all doubt by stepping out of his own century that this is not so. Measured against the ages, quote-unquote mere Christianity turns out to be no insipid interdenominational transparency, but something positive, self-consistent, and inexhaustible. I know it indeed to my cost. In the days when I still hated Christianity, now, I learned to recognize, like some all too familiar smell, that almost unvarying something which met me. Now in Puritan Bunyan, now in Anglican Hooker, now in Thomist Dante. It was there, honeyed and floral, in Francois de Sales. It was there, grave and homely in Spencer and Walton. Yeah, I did that on purpose.
I love your French pronunciation.
Sales.
Sales. Francoise de Sales. There you go.
Solace.
Solace.
Yeah. Francois de Sales. There we go. Again, go ahead, Siri. Go ahead. Say it better than me.
Oh, you want me to have her read it?
We got to Google it. We got to Google read it.
Oh, let's see here.
We haven't done this in a while.
Speech. Start speaking. Did you hear it?
Francois de Sales.
Yeah, she said it right.
Solace. It was there, grave and homely in Spencer and Walton. It was there grim but manful in Pascal and Johnson. There again with a mild, frightening, paradisial flavor in Vaughan and Bame and Traherne. In the urban sobriety of the 18th century, one was not safe. Law and Butler were two lions in the path. The supposed paganism of the Elizabethans could not keep it out. It lay in wait where a man might have supposed himself safest, in the very center of the Fairy Queen and the Arcadia. It was, of course, varied, and yet after all so unmistakably the same, recognizable, not to be evaded, the odor which is death to us until we allow it to become life. Quote,
Right.
an air that kills from yon far country blows.
I can't help but think of two stories. The first is the conductor, I forget his name now, for the Bach Collegium, Japan.
Okay.
So Japanese man. He had been like a Bach scholar for a long time, but was conducting it. And he knew that Bach was a Christian and specifically a Lutheran, right? But eventually he just couldn't, as he records, he could not get past that the joy that he received in performing this music, learning it and performing it, was because of what it confessed, the
Sure.
faith, right? And he had to reconcile with the Christian faith confessed therein, right? And the music did that.
Yeah.
Suzuki is his last name. I forget his first name. And then
He makes the cool recorders.
that's a different thing. That's Suzuki
okay.
method, but it's okay. There's a lot of Suzukis. They also make motorbikes and cheap
That's
cars.
crazy. Are they all from the same family?
Probably originally. I don't
So
know.
talented.
I have no idea. And the other example is the book you just got in the mail, right? Where like reading
Tolkien's
Tolkien,
Dogmatics.
reading Tolkien, you can't help but bump straight up against that he's a full-fledged Roman Catholic.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're a Christian, you recognize it immediately. If you're not a Christian, I still think you have the mythology itself that he tells.
Yeah.
It has a religious fervor to it and a confession, and you bump up again. I mean, good versus evil, that very black and white distinction. And even the stuff about East and West, I think is really kind of fun because it's such a huge part of Western Christianity. It's like where's the Eye of Sauron? Where is it? And it's this fake light that comes but it's a land of darkness and
Right.
yeah. And where does Frodo go in the end? When he goes off into the sunset, right? He goes into the West.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean, even things like that, which are a huge part of like our liturgical and practical traditions, they're right there in the text, and you bump into these. I did a whole paper on this.
Okay.
Ended up being like a 40-page thing. It was supposed to be a 10-page paper, but I just couldn't stop writing. I was in the summer; it was intensive, and he actually he mimics like some Latin chants with some of those.
Oh, really?
The Elvis chants are mimicking these old Latin chants that I didn't even know. Right, but if you were like in a full Latin Mass church, you would recognize some of these things, or at least you'd be like, that sounds familiar. So I mean, you bump into that's what he's suggesting. It's whether you know they're Christian or not, it doesn't matter. You're going to bump into people of faith in their confession, and then I think he's getting at the point is that there's a consistent Christian confession that's happening in them. Right. Anyway.
So he continues then, we are all rightly distressed and ashamed also at the divisions of Christendom. But those who have always lived within the Christian fold may be too easily dispirited by them. They are bad, but such people do not know what it looks like from without. Everybody on Facebook, apparently.
Yeah.
Jeepers. What a horror show. Seen from there, what is left intact despite all the divisions still appears, as it truly is, an immensely formidable unity. I know, for I saw it, and well our enemies know it, that unity any of us can find by going out of his own age. It is not enough, but it is more than you had thought till then. Once you are well soaked in it, if you then venture to speak, you will have an amusing experience. You will be thought a papist when you are actually reproducing Bunyan. You'll be thought a pantheist when you are quoting Aquinas and so forth.
There it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, just quote Capon around people that are really serious about theology. You're immediately a universalist without any conditions. Like Capon,
so true.
You must be pro-divorce and bigamy and a universalist.
Well, or never mind. What's the contemporary debates? I guess it's anybody that happened to have taught at Luther Seminary, including yourself, that makes you a radical Lutheran or something, or whatever.
Yes, exactly. It's like I don't remember voting.
Well, and like
Was there a meeting I didn't attend?
Like, well, I mean, it is possible to quote people that you largely don't share the same confession with, or entirely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've got a stack of Nietzsche in front of me right now.
Right.
And
That doesn't mean that.
How can you talk about Nietzsche and be a fan and be a Christian? I'm like, because I'm not a pod person. I can actually read someone I disagree with and still appreciate where they're right.
Yeah, and there's no wisdom you can gain there. And maybe actually the wisdom is the strengthening of your confession by the opposite, right? Yeah.
Because it's to your point then, and C.S. Lewis is about this, so it's not off topic, is in a way you're almost like a forensic psychologist or just a forensics expert when you read text, old text, because you are digging through them.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we talked about pattern recognition, and you're finding these threads and you're starting to pull on these threads and you're asking, well, where does this go? And why is this here? And why did he say this? And what is this all about? And you're almost like performing an autopsy on the text in order to get to why did he die? How did he end up here laid out on this beach this way? Same way, it's like, how did we get to this point where we're reading this? And why does it matter? And so we're almost doing that. That's the science of theology. The science of theology is saying, okay, we got these rules, we got these methods, we call them dogmatics, we call it doctrine, even hermeneutics. And we're going to bring all this to bear on this text and ask really big questions. What does this have to say about life, the universe, and everything? And hopefully... 42. Hopefully, it's obviously a very short book. And as a consequence, in the reading of it, not only are you joining a conversation, not only are you learning a whole new language, so to speak, not only are you possibly having your faith and your confession strengthened, but it brings you alongside this great cloud of witnesses. And just as I would never wish anyone in my congregation to ever suffer any kind of horrible hurt or harm, no matter what my personal feelings about them may be. And in the same way that we would never wish that an atheist, for example, experience the final judgment, not because we like the atheist, but rather we as Christians are aware nobody, we don't want anybody to have to face the final judgment because it's horrific. It's the worst thing that could possibly happen to anybody because it's eternal. And since I wouldn't want to suffer that, and this goes back to Ezekiel and God saying, I'm going to actually reward them with their own works. My judgment is their judgment of others. And you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
Well, I don't want to look at another person and go, man, I really hope he goes to hell. Versus but if he's saying that about you and it came true, what would you think? That's horrible to condemn someone to hell in this way. And
so is there a means of escape, right? For your neighbor. And of course, so what would be the lovely thing to do or to say, more particularly, right?
Right. Exactly. The point is not to condemn the neighbor, but rather to proclaim Christ to the neighbor. And say, hey, have you ever heard about...
Right. And if they're going, to live a life of immorality, the only thing that should be damnable in the end is their denial of Christ, right? That they've heard the gospel.
Sin. Yeah.
Right. And that if you leave them, I mean, there's lots of exhortation in the scripture about leaving your brother in their sin and not preaching to them.
Right.
Yeah. Not forgiving them.
Right. So then, you are rightly distressed and ashamed of all these big divisions. Okay. But unity being what it is, we're more united than we are divided. It's just, culture. And
I appreciate the sentiment. But practically speaking, I mean, this is going to be a big year for Lewis. It's his anniversary, I guess, year of some sort, 1517 in particular, having fall conference is on Lewis.
Yes.
Was it his birthday? I don't remember. I think it's his birthday. It's a big birthday, 125th birthday maybe.
Let's go with that.
Okay. Whatever it is, it's occasion to read a lot of Lewis. Practically speaking, he did it. Right. I mean, he did the radio addresses, especially the Mere Christianity book, those radio addresses where he did try to, bring the scriptures to bear on any number of situations in a very practical way and a broad way that could be heard by Catholics and Anglicans and Presbyterians, in his own UK, right? Or Puritans, if there are any left, or whatever. Right. And now by us, as Lutherans. And there's something broadly appealing and not not necessarily dividing, although he's still divisive in a couple of places and ways, right?
Always.
Can't help it. All right. So I appreciate that project that he actually not only says, oh yeah, there's more that we have in common than what divides us, that he actually does it.
Yeah.
Right. And he tries for the sake of, living together in any kind of civility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I think this is a project that we've lost, that we fail. What is it? Fail to recognize the moral character that was at least was part of our tradition as a people here in this country,
Right.
and maybe even the source or origins of that tradition. But even what was the occasion we brought up here recently on the show? Oh, I think it was in Dearborn, right, where you had both Christians and Muslims parents
right, yeah.
joining together to say these books are inappropriate for children.
Right.
Right, and to say, yeah, they certainly don't share the confession of Christ, but they do share at least that kind of moral, ethical, common ground that's built into nature. It's not necessarily coming out of their traditions, actually,
Right.
even though the traditions share that as well. Right, and to recognize that, and then that might actually, what did our president say? All right, I say he's our president, elected leader guy. Oh, that we hope that this holiday season will drain the poison of divisiveness out of our nation.
Okay.
It's like, wait a minute, you're responsible for it.
Right.
So you haven't actually practiced it. And that's why I think we can commend somebody like Lewis, who actually, did the work.
Walk the walk.
More or less, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
So you have now got on the great level viaduct which crosses the ages and which looks so high from the valleys, so low from the mountains, so narrow compared with the swamps, so broad compared with the sheep tracks. The present book is something of an experiment. The translation is intended for the world at large, not only for theological students. There you go. If it succeeds, other translations of other great Christian books will presumably follow. In one sense, of course, it is not the first in the field. Translations of the Theologia Germanica, the Imitation, the Scale of Perfection, and the Revelations of Lady Julian of Norwich are already on the market and are very valuable, though some of them are not very scholarly. But it will be noticed that these are all books of devotion rather than of doctrine. Now the layman or amateur needs to be instructed as well as to be exhorted. In this age, his need for knowledge is particularly pressing. Nor would I admit any sharp division between the two kinds of book. For my own part, I tend to find the doctrinal books often more helpful in devotion than the devotional books. And I rather suspect that the same experience may await many others in generations to come. I believe
You're not going to find on the Incarnation by Athanasius in the Walmart checkout line, in other words.
Not normally, no.
No.
I believe that many who find that, quote unquote, nothing happens when they sit down or kneel down to a book of devotion, which find that, or would find that the heart sings unbidden while they are working their way through a tough bit of theology with a pipe in their teeth and a pencil in their hand.
Now, he's just projecting here.
Yeah,
he's an
that's what he's
academic. He's just projecting.
That's all. We can dismiss all of this. It's
But I put it this way. Of all those books that, all those times where you had quote-unquote Bible study, which you were really reading second, third order, discourse on the scripture, if you were lucky. And a lot of times not even that, just speculative. Do you have any of those books? Where are they? Did you throw them away? I mean, do you go back to them? Do you read them again?
Did you read them to the end even?
I think one of the greatest examples of this is the, in our church's tradition, is the Portals of Prayer, right?
Sure.
So it's these one-page devotionals that are written, but they're not written. They're written to be disposable. They're actually printed on disposable paper. You just throw them away when you're done with it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there aren't valuable things written and confessed in there. That's not the point. The point is that it's not trying to give you something that you can return to and that can transcend that moment,
sure.
or even have longstanding value. And it's confessed even by the kind of paper they print it on, right? And the disposable nature of it. This is why we have hymnals instead of having. What does the Roman Church do? They print like little breviaries.
Yeah.
Not what do they call it?
It's like more like a missal.
Yeah, that's right. They print missals, but they print it on that really cheap paper, and they're like paperback, and they're for a season, and then you throw it away. and they print a new one. And it makes it easy. You don't have to print bulletins.
Mm-hmm.
We basically do the same thing. We just do it weekly with a bulletin.
Right.
Right. Where you print all the propers in there. It's like, there's just something about it that's like, this moment is disposable. This is just a moment in time. It's like, no, actually it's transcendent truth that we're confessing here. We're receiving. And so even the way that we deliver it, which is what he's talking about, the book, not the devotional, the book with the pipe and the pencil, because you're going to write it. If you're going to write it, take notes in the pencil, you're going to return to that book and look at your notes again.
Yep.
That's what he's saying.
This is a good translation of a very great book. St. Athanasius has suffered in popular estimation from a certain sentence in the Athanasian Creed. I will not labor the point that the work is not exactly a creed, and it was not by St. Athanasius, for I think it is a very fine piece of writing. The words which faith except everyone do keep whole and undefiled, without doubt he shall perish everlastingly. That's the offensive words.
Still today.
Still to this day. Oh, so many questions that I have brought to me. They are commonly misunderstood words. The operative word is keep, not acquire, or never heard of Christ, nor even those who have misunderstood.
Oh, you skipped a line.
Did I? I'm sorry.
Operative word is keep, not acquire.
I suppose I could just increase the size of the font rather than squinting my way through this. Oh,
that's what I did.
Donovan.
Or believe, even believe, but keep.
Right. Sorry. I'm just resetting now.
The author, in fact, is not talking about unbelievers.
Mm-hmm.
You find it?
He's not talking about unbelievers, but also about deserters. Not about those who have never heard of Christ, nor even those who have misunderstood and refused to accept him. But of those who, having really understood and really believed, then allow themselves under the sway of sloth of fashion or any other invited confusion to be drawn away into sub-Christian modes of thought.
It would be worse for you than if you'd never been, be better for you if you had never been born.
Terribly British sentence.
It's like, I love how he does not agree with, you run this through Grammarly and see what happens.
Right, exactly.
Split infinitive, stop it.
Yes. They are a warning against the curious modern assumption that all changes of belief, however brought about, are necessarily exempt from blame.
Ooh, that's a statement, isn't it?
It is.
Like, just because you believe something new doesn't mean it's right.
Right. It's like the theological version of statism.
Uh-huh.
Like, what would you call that? Like historicism? What is that?
Well, no, it's just self-affirmation, right?
It is at the expense of ancient text or pre-modern texts.
Well, and we've argued for this method when reading the Bible, or and especially reading like early commentary on the scriptures. It's like, okay, I don't agree with this, but the burden of proof is really on me then.
Correct.
To say, and especially with like accepted confessions, like Nicene or Apostles' Creed. Right. It's like, wait a minute, okay, if I'm going to teach contrary to this, the burden is more heavy for me to demonstrate.
There's the science aspect of it again. It's forensically, like, I don't think she committed suicide. Prove it.
Right.
It's
but I mean,
even her. It's on you.
Yeah. So if you're going to use science, I mean, like for Galileo to say what he said, was incredibly challenging, right? Because he had to defy millennia of accepted understanding, right? That doesn't mean he was wrong, and it doesn't mean it was easy for him. I mean, didn't he get burnt at the stake? I think he did.
Was he?
Did he? He was rejected by the church anyway.
Let's find out.
Yeah. And so I appreciate, I mean, it is hard to stand against the stream. And the burden is on you. That doesn't mean you can't do it, but.
He died after suffering heart palpitations and a long fever.
Oh, well, that's not too bad.
So not Galileo.
No. Copernicus? I don't know. It doesn't matter. The idea, so science is a good example. And the same thing happened. I mean, Luther would be an example of this in our own, experience. For Luther to stand against the stream in the way he did, it not only takes courage, but it also takes, I mean, he had to demonstrate from the scriptures, and he really spent his whole life doing that, right? And sometimes just exhaustively. You can read it, you can hear it in his voice. It's like, just read Romans with me, okay? Or read Galatians, and tell me that you don't hear what it says, right? The clear meaning of the text is right there.
Yeah.
Right. But the burden was on him to do that. That's the point, right?
Yeah.
to go against the stream that way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So going on then, he says, that's not my immediate concern. But when I mention the creed, commonly called of St. Athanasius, only to get out of the reader's way what may have been a bogey and to put the true Athanasius in its place.
Mm-hmm.
His epitaph is Athanasius contra mundum, Athanasius against the world. We are proud that our own country has more than once stood against the world.
Not anymore.
Athanasius did the same. He stood for the Trinitarian doctrine whole and undefiled when it looked as if all the civilized world was slipping back from Christianity into the religion of Arius, into one of those sensible, quote-unquote sensible, synthetic religions, which are so strongly recommended today. And which coexist. Which then as now included among their devotees many highly cultivated clergymen.
Judeo-Christian faith.
There we go. It is his glory that he did not move with the times. It is his reward that he now remains when those times, as all times do, have moved away.
So the proof is in the pudding, is what he's saying.
Yeah.
The fact that we still have on the Incarnation.
Yeah, right. And not
demonstrates
it's his creed.
Correct. Yeah, we don't even have it. I know they burnt it all, but
right.
But if there was something worth preserving, God would have preserved it. I mean, if you want to just be divine about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Because he did. That's that's an essential Christian confession, right? That God preserves His church, even as all the world around, or even the church itself, goes into apostasy. There's the remnant.
Yeah, right.
That he keeps, like you said, the ones that have the name put on their forehead, right? In Ezekiel 9. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I first opened his De Incarnatione, I soon discovered by a very simple test. That's right, I said it in Italian, not Latin. I went there. I soon discovered by a very simple test that I was reading a masterpiece. I knew very little Christian Greek except that of the New Testament, and I had expected difficulties. To my astonishment, I found it almost as easy as Xenophon, and only a mastermind could, in the 4th century, have written so deeply on such a subject with such classical simplicity. This is a great point, too, because, again, I can draw the comparison to one of my favorite texts ever, Beowulf, is that once that kind of English is explained to you by someone who understands it, on YouTube, not surprisingly, there's a Beowulf scholar. He lives in Montana. He's kind of like a cattle guy, but he's an expert in ancient languages. So he speaks ancient Norse and ancient Anglo and stuff. It's just wild because he's got a thick twang and the drawl and the cowboy hat, and then he's just an expert in all this stuff. He consulted on the Northman movie, by the way.
Wow.
Anyways, but he talks about, this is the language, this is this ancient Anglo language. And once you get the pronunciation down and you just kind of got to hold the marbles in your mouth so that everything kind of rolls around, then it makes sense. And then when you're reading Beowulf, and even reading a good Seamus Heaney translation of it, this Irish poet, it's I always say it this way, is that good language is chewy, right? It's meaty. When you're reading it, you can literally feel the word in your mouth.
It's the ones where, for me, it's like, wait, I'm going to go back and say that again.
Yeah, right.
Like if you're reading it out loud, yeah.
Yeah, and so when you read, like he's saying, it's not just the theology that sets your hair on fire that gets you there. It's not. It's for someone like us who really appreciate and almost venerate language, words, and have a deep appreciation, especially for old words. I love Torah Hebrew, the old ancient Hebrew, pre-poetic even, because it's just so earthy and plain. It's like, again, Middle High German, Luther's German Bible. It's just so chewy that when a word pops out at you, you're like, tzedakah. I want more of that word right there. Or ruach for the Holy Spirit. And you're like, I want more ruach. That's a good word. It's a meaty word. It just sticks to your jaws.
Well, it's guttural.
Yes, exactly. There we go. And that in and of itself can also draw you in, right? Like you were saying with the conductor. Like, what's the joy in the music? Not the words necessarily, but this music evokes joy from me. And then he goes to the words, and he's like, oh, the words evoke the same joy, but where do the words come from? Oh, because he was a devout Christian who read the Bible. Maybe I should read the Bible. And then you find those words in the Bible, and now you start chewing on God's word, which is always dangerous to chew on God's word because absolution comes with it. And that's how he gets you, I think, a lot of times.
You mean death? Then
Yes.
absolution.
Yes, death and absolution. But
They
that's
might
the
kill
divine
you.
The
Yeah.
divine foxiness is, well, I can't get you to go to church, so I'll just give you this book, like Lewis says. I'll just hand you this book by this guy. It's just Dante Alighieri, no big deal. It's pagan. There's no Christianity in here for you to worry about. This is all just mythology. And you start chewing on the language and the words, and you're like, oh, like Virgil. Who's Virgil?
Mm-hmm.
And you go to Virgil, and you start, oh, well, where's this stuff about the devil come from? And what's Purgatorio? And what's Paradiso? What are these about? Where does that come from? And all of a sudden, you're there again. And like Lewis says, though, in almost an inverted way, you don't start the primary text, start the secondary. Then you read like John's Revelation, the Apocalypse.
Mm.
And it's like not everything Dante writes in the Inferno is actually biblically correct. In fact, most of it isn't. And then you realize, oh, most of what we understand to be hell today is from Dante, not from Scripture.
And Dante's, I know, I read some commentary on this, right? I mean, he's drawing heavily from Jerome.
Yeah.
Jerome's commentary, not from Jerome's translation. Right. Yeah, so it's Jerome. This is, bad ideas have a way of doing this, right?
Right.
As they get repeated enough times and you start to believe them.
Yes.
You know, that the Federal Reserve Bank is controlling inflation for us to make our lives better.
Right.
Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Something biblical.
That and other fairy tales will be on. Yes.
Well, I had a comment, but I got distracted by my thought about monetary policy. Anyway.
So anyway, and Xenophon's great too. I love that book. Every page I read confirmed, because again, same thing. You read Xenophon, and you're like, oh.
Well, he has a great name. I mean, it's a great name. How
it's
can you not enjoy it?
Such a great story. Every page I read confirmed this impression. His approach to the miracles is badly needed today, for it is the final answer to those who object to them as arbitrary and meaningless violations of the laws of nature. Yes. Like I've said.
He's
God
quoting somebody.
Yeah, it's in quotes.
It's still today, right?
This is the thing about the Incarnation, and it's not here, so I'm going to get to it because I think it's important, is that what the Incarnation does is it says to us the things that we call supernatural are actually natural to God.
Mm-hmm.
And what we call natural is actually subnatural to God.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as if what God is doing is super. It's that we're so subnatural in our relationship to reality and objective, reality.
Right.
That when God just does the things that he's always done, we go, look at that. It's supernatural.
Right.
It's like, well, no, it's not. That's how he operates. That's why we talked about on the podcast, I think last week or so, why is it when God shows up, no one's freaked out? Right? Like everyone's just like, hey, Lord, like, how do you know it's him?
That is until the New Testament. And by that point,
yeah.
Well, I think it's the glory cloud has been gone.
Yeah.
Kavod Yahweh has not.
Yeah.
It didn't return to Herod's temple.
Right.
It's been gone since Solomon's temple was destroyed.
Right.
And so, I mean, they just 400 years, 500 years.
Yep.
It's 586 or
Yeah.
something like that, right? It's like it's just been gone.
Right.
God seems absent.
Because that's where we're at in Ezekiel with my mom and I on our Thursday Bible study. Is we're right at that where the glory of the Lord leaves the temple.
Right.
And you're like, wait, what? Yeah, he got like it, and that's the great thing again, that meaty Hebrew that Adler translates. The glory of the Lord left. He got up, he left. He stopped at the door, looked around, said, "Kill the priests," and then left. Where's he going? To kill everybody. And you're like, what is
Ezekiel is
happening?
kind of the Tarantino-esque.
Really, it really is exactly. You're like, whoa, dude. And then God throws him to Chaldea because that's where the remnant are going to be brought from. But it's like you said, the Kavod Yahweh, it's not this.
I mean, because it does appear with the shepherds, with the angel and the shepherds, right?
Yes.
And I'm like, wait a minute, but it's not in the temple.
Right.
Oh, I could preach a sermon on this. It's like, what's it doing out in the fields with shepherds?
Right. What's it doing sitting next to a well with a woman?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right. What's it doing talking to the Canaanite woman? That's the point of the scriptures too, though, is to point out that the Kavod Yahweh is not the sole property of Israel. Like, you don't control him. He's here because he chooses to dwell amongst you, tabernacle amongst you.
Yeah, that the glory of God would be revealed.
But at any point, he could just go walkabout on you because that's what he does. And when he does start going walkabout, that's when you should be nervous.
Mm-hmm.
Because you'll turn around in the market and be like, whoa. But you still know it's the Lord. It's still the Kavod Yahweh. You still see, you're like, that's the Kavod Yahweh. I know that guy.
So to your natural, subnatural point, I actually, I I didn't really think of it at the moment, but I preached a odd funeral sermon for me, because the woman who died, she had had an MS for like 26 years, been diagnosed for 26 years, so just debilitating, right? But when she was younger, she loved horses. Her family still loves horses. They do this horse riding and whatnot. And I used the text from Revelation 22, with the wide boulevard and the streets, and suggested,
You didn't go with the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse?
No, I went the other direction. Is that that she, you wouldn't need to train the horse. The horse would obey your command, right? Rather than just confess the resurrection of the body, but also then confess the new heavens and the new earth, which is they're contingent, right? I mean, what's the point of being resurrected in the body if there's not an earth to dwell on and dwell in, right? And so it was a little bit different for me for a funeral to go to the new heavens and new earth, to confess the resurrection. But her love of nature, I suggested, was like she recognized that there's something not quite right about creation, and that we should be able to relate to animals this way, right? And you have to do it through force and through training, right?
Yeah, I like that.
And bit and bridle.
Yeah.
But that she was already experiencing a little bit of the real nature of things, from Eden.
I might have to do that with my farmers. I like that.
Well, that's where I went with it. Is the farmers understood this. They understand, the consequence of the fall on nature in a way that we don't. Like I said, in suburban Indiana or urban Chicago, we just have no concept. As a matter of fact, they'll propose things like building a skyscraper that's an urban farm, and you're like, do you not know how these things, like, that's not even at all remotely how this thing works. Right.
So these arbitrary and meaningless violations of natural law are here shown to be rather the retelling in capital letters of the same message, which nature writes in her crabbed cursive hand. The very operations one would expect of him who was so full of life that when he wished to die, he had to borrow death from others. There's a line. He who was so full of life that when he wanted to die, he had to borrow death from other people.
Because he is the life,
Yeah, the whole book, indeed, is a picture of the tree of life. A sappy and golden book full of buoyancy and confidence. We cannot, I admit, appropriate all its confidence today. We cannot point to the high virtue of Christian living and the gay, almost mocking courage of Christian martyrdom as a proof of our doctrines, with quite that assurance which Athanasius takes as a matter of course. But whoever may be to blame for that, it is not Athanasius.
Well, there's the funeral preaching right there. I mean, we do. I mean, it's not that we're not grieving with those who grieve and mourning with those who mourn.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we definitely preach in a way that, we mock death and,
right.
And I mean, even the grave at that, even if we lay them in the grave, we're mocking it and saying, it is like a seed, putting a seed into the ground, and, Christ will call on the last day. And it just, I know how awkward it is for people to hear those words.
Because
it's so it's contradictory to the experience they're having, right?
Yeah.
The sensory experience. So I love how he's saying that, borrowing death from others. It's the problem isn't with the text or with Jesus or with Athanasius. It's the problems with us.
Ironically, sadly, tragically. So the translator knows so much more Christian Greek than I that it would be out of place for me to praise her version, but it seems to me to be in the right tradition of English translation. I do not think the reader will find here any of that sawdusty quality which is so common in modern renderings from the ancient languages. That is as much as the English reader will notice. Those who compare the version with the original will be able to estimate how much wit and talent is presupposed in such a choice. For example, as, quote-unquote, these wiseacres on the very first page.
So this introduction was before what edition? Must have been an edition in the 60s, or was it 50s?
Or earlier than that, I thought.
You think so? Okay.
Yeah. Let me see. Does it not say at the top?
Yeah, I don't know which translation it ends up with. We'll do this. Don't know. Way to go, producer.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to find good help. Just go on Amazon.
I know.
Just list on Amazon.
All right, so...
but that's the end of the text while Gillespie looks that up. And I think that what the text needs to do, and therefore what the preacher needs to do at this proclamation, as you noted with the shepherds as an example, is that it's not a matter of training. It's not a matter of preparation. It's not even a matter of faith. It's actually just the fact that when the glory of the Lord appears to you and says, here, this is how it is now with us, you will simply tell everybody. You don't have a choice about it. It's not as if you can control it. You have to tell everybody, because what just happened is so mind-boggling, so shocking to the system, and so transcendent. And it catches you up into this greater truth, which is the fact that I believed, but wow, I didn't realize it was this. And they're out there watching and tending to their flocks. They're not worried about who's being born that night. That's not their problem. It's not their vocation. So for the angels to appear to them, for the glory of heaven to appear to them and say, you need to go now. And this, I was watching.
Now, in hindsight, of course it was shepherds, right?
Of course it was. Of course.
Yeah.
And they left their sheep to go see Jesus.
Right. The lost sheep, in a sense. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was watching a documentary the other night about these sheep herders actually living out in the middle of nowhere in the Balkans. And
of course you were.
Yeah, I was relaxing as I was winding down to go to sleep. But what I found fascinating is that they're out there shepherding these sheep around on these mountainous, patches of land. And the sheep don't travel in a perfect flock like we imagine them, right? They're not all standing stock still, just waiting around saying, well, is someone going to hurt us? Like, where's the sheepdog? Where's the shepherd? Like, I don't know what to do anymore. Instead, these sheep they're like cattle. They're all over the place. Mm-hmm. They're wandering in lines.
They're just looking for green grass. That's what they're doing. Yeah.
And if you were to just stop shepherding these sheep, they would all wander off in different directions. Because they're sheep. That's what they're doing, right? They're, like you said, they're just looking for green grass. They're just following the breadcrumbs to wherever
the only one that looks for other sheep are the rams.
Yeah, exactly.
For a very specific purpose. Yes.
So when Jesus says the shepherds
or the lambs following their mother, yes,
sure.
Okay, fine.
But when he says the shepherd would leave the 99 to go pursue the one, he's fully aware again of how absurd that statement is, because they're all going to run away.
It never made any sense. No.
And they're not going to just stand there and wait for you to come back. And maybe they get picked off one by the wolves. No, they're just going to wander away. And so you're not going to be able to go out. The next morning, your flock's not going to be there. Right? So good luck finding all of them. And in the same way, when the angels tell the shepherds to go and to find the Christ child, not only do they go and find the Christ child, but then they immediately go and start telling people, well, what about their sheep? Like, that's their vocation. That's what they're supposed to do. They get paid for that. There's almost no chance those sheep are still going to be there. Not all of them.
Nope.
So when Jesus tells the parable, and again, it was actually you bringing this up that just got me thinking about it. So this is first for me too, is really the parable of the lost sheep is Jesus talking about himself. He's the lost sheep.
Yeah. I've never preached it that way.
Neither have I, because he's always the shepherd that finds the lost sheep, which is you. Mm-hmm. Versus like, no, he's actually the lost sheep.
Yeah. Or he gets lost for you. Yeah.
He gets lost for you, just like he has to borrow life from you to die, or borrow death from you in order to die, because he is life itself. So he is the shepherd. But if he can sympathize with us in every way, such as Hebrews says, then he would also have to become sheep.
So to my question, I have the answer. This is from the C.S. Lewis Institute. So definitive source. The translation was published in 1946. It's attributed to a religious of CSMV, whatever that stands for. But then the article actually tells you who it is.
Okay.
It's Lewis's friend, Sister Penelope Lawson, a nun in the order of the Convent of the Community of St. Mary the Virgin. That's what that stands for. At the time, nuns from this order were not permitted to write books under their own names. So readers looking for the translation will find the translators listed a religious of CSMV.
Nice.
Yeah, Sister Penelope Lawson, her translation.
So
I don't know if that's helpful.
Here
it's
is
something.
Actually the end of St. Leo's Christmas sermon, which is the next page after the one we just read on this website, ancientanglican.com. But it's actually from Hebrews, the conclusion to St. Leo's Christmas sermon. Since therefore the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same nature, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is, the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong bondage. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. That's how he concluded his Christmas sermon. That's great.
Ending on bondage.
Yeah, that's so great. Through fear of death, we're subject to lifelong bondage. So who does he deliver? Those who are afraid of dying because they're slaves to the devil.
Just like Zechariah sings in the Benedictus, right? For those who in the slavery or the bondage of death, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to lead his people into the way of peace.
Just like in Ezekiel, just like, this constant
Yeah, that
theme.
whole idea of shepherding seems to come up frequently. I don't know why.
And that the people that are not afraid of death, who think that they're, because, again, going back to Ezekiel, the woes start coming out in chapters 9, 10, and 11. Woe to Jerusalem, woe to Israel, woe, 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 woe to me, says Ezekiel. Better I'd never been born.
Yeah, they sound mighty familiar, like, oh, I don't know, Jesus in Jerusalem during Holy Week. Yeah.
Right. Is
Same
that
thing.
He's saying it would be better if you had never been born to people who say, I am perfectly alive. What are you saying?
Right.
You don't understand you're already dead. Otherwise, you would be afraid of not death, but God.
And you remain dead apart from me.
Exactly. And so you would be not only horrified by your bondage to sin and the devil, but you would also be scared to death, of death itself. You would be scared as hell of death. And therefore, when my word came to you, you would grab at it like a drowning man grabs at a life preserver. But you don't, which is why you don't listen. And that's why you don't obey.
Yeah.
So,
but don't you think it's that people actually, they don't fear death as much as they fear life?
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, we call it life, but it's really just the fear of death.
No, I know it's a flipping of language.
Yeah.
But it's like, and they definitely, because they fear life, they fear the freedom that life gives.
Yes.
And I'm just thinking of, that language from the Benedictus. It's been in my head. It struck me for decades probably, but free to serve him without fear all the days of our life. And you're like,
right.
What? I've never experienced that. I've never experienced that.
When do I get there? I want that one.
To serve him without fear and all the days. It's like, well, service, how is that freedom? This is there's also, seems like there's contradictions there. Yes. Right. Well, no, the contradiction is in your head. It's not in the text.
Right.
Yeah. Beautiful.
And that's the thing, is that in the end, like I say in the Christmas Eve sermon, the only reason we're here is because we're waiting for words. But we need words that answer the big questions and give big answers to the big questions, because really in the end what we're praying for is that somebody would actually speak into the silence. And that silence is that question: is there a God? Does he listen? Does he care? Does he answer my prayers? Because you and I as pastors, we pray for God to give us words. Mm-hmm. And like I said, sometimes they come one drop at a time. It's almost torturous. At other times, it's like chunks, like glacial, breaking off. Other times, there's no words. And when those words aren't there, and you pray, Lord, show me Jesus, give me the words, and they don't come, you start to wonder, and you start to worry. And that's everybody, though. Everywhere and every time.
I will say this, though. I mean, I've had to learn this the hard way, is that there are times where I don't think the Lord was giving me to prepare in advance.
Right.
Like
that too, yeah.
It's like, no, I heard the text in the context of the assembly with my fellow Christians in the moment of that morning or that evening or whatever. Yeah. And then the Spirit spoke to me and said, here's the words that you're given. And I hadn't even been able to write anything down. Yeah. Right. And as I don't use that as an excuse, because I try to write. Yeah. Right. But on the other hand, if I can't, if it, for whatever reason, personal, family, I've never had the occasion to date where the Lord has said, I'm not going to give you a word to say at all. Mm-hmm. There's always been a word for me.
Okay. So he doesn't give you a sermon to preach that you write down on paper.
Mm-hmm. Right. Exactly.
Sometimes the sermon is just there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's terrifying. I mean, it is.
It is.
Because you don't know, am I going to say it well? I mean, because I craft the sermon, on paper. So at least I'm confident that maybe, but I found that to be a restraint sometimes too. Right.
Well, and this Christmas Eve, my sermon is literally one word, which is Emmanuel. That's really the sermon, is God is with us. The answer to all your questions is simply for you to evoke the name Emmanuel.
Well, and arguably you could probably spin out a 12 to 15 minute on that without
And I did.
without much meditation. I mean,
Right.
because you've meditated on it your whole ministry. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
What does it mean that God's with us?
Right. And that's enough, especially in a time when, like we were saying at the front end of this, of there's so much freight piled on top of Christmas and on top of certain holidays. And our expectations as pastors, the people that come into church on Christmas Eve or Christmas morning, their expectations, the way to, at least I've found it through my experience, the only way to really dodge all of those is simply to just say, here's the text. And like we read actually last week, that you can do that. We read Keller on that, and then we read Sproul on that, and they both covered the text, but they never engaged in first order discourse from the text. And so when you say, unto us a child is born, unto us a child is given, his name is Emmanuel, God with us, you just change all the plurals to the you.
Yeah.
God
Or
is
we.
with you.
Yeah.
You just change from second to first order discourse. You start to assert, you start to proclaim. Because that's the point of Christmas, is he is a God not only with us, but he is the God who is with you.
Mm-hmm.
And he is enfleshed for you, and he sends his preachers with words for you, and he drapes his spirit over you and in you and possesses you, so that there's nowhere that you go that he is not with you. And that's literally the only thing that differentiates our God from all the other gods, is that our God actually claims, not only am I with you at all times, but I'm enfleshed for you at all times.
Right.
And not dressed up as flesh, but I'm in flesh. I am flesh and blood.
And of course, I mean, Christmas, it's like,
Yeah.
I'm for you in a very particular way.
Yes, very particular.
Not only born in the manger,
Right.
but now, in my body and blood for your
Right.
forgiveness. Here,
Right.
now, receive. Right.
And as a side note, too, if you differentiate the birth narrative from the rest of Jesus' ministry and death, I think that creates this dissonance, actually, because is this babe, the son of Mary, the one who has come with grace and mercy, or has he come in judgment? And if you want to turn him into someone who comes in judgment, then basically what you've got for Christmas is a time bomb. This baby is a time bomb. And when he reaches a certain age, it's going to go off. And that's really what the Gospels become then. Versus, well, if he's full of grace and mercy, and he's the Lamb who's crucified from the foundation of the world, and the birth of Jesus has been foretold for generations, and we know that his coming is in this Isaiah 51 and 52, this suffering servant. How is it that between the birth narrative and the rest of your preaching, you disconnected from that? Where did the lamb go? Where did the good shepherd go? Where did the blood go? Because it seems like you've kind of tried to resurrect or reincarnate Moses in the name of Jesus versus Jesus.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's especially at Christmas time, because you get the bah humbuggers and you get the upset Christians because it's the worst Christmas ever for reasons. Or maybe it's the most perfect Christmas ever for reasons.
Well, it's cold and windy. I'll give them that.
Yeah. So we
Nothing
got
wrong
that
with
going for us. So at least, hey, you won't hear this till after Christmas, but if this was your reason for not going to church on Christmas morning, Sunday morning, well, hey, there you go. You got your excuse. It was cold
Yeah.
and windy and Christmas.
Yeah, I think the cognitive disconnect is we don't actually look to the whole person and work of Jesus. So we try to deal with each aspect or each moment in time.
Because we're slaves to the moment, right?
Right. Whereas if you, like I was saying before, like the message and the work of the Holy Spirit through that message in the shepherds is repeated, at least 7 times, 8 times throughout Luke's gospel in particular. The same things keep happening, and Jesus keeps declared a statement, right? Rise, take up your bed and walk. And then they glorify God, and they give and they go tell others, right? And they give thanks. So it's like you would see this. It's like, wait a minute, maybe that's actually the proper work of Jesus. Maybe that's actually what he came to do, is to declare, resurrection, freedom, healing, all the mercy and work of God for sinners. Yeah. And the response is common as well.
Right.
Even at the cross, even amongst the centurion, Gentile that confesses him.
Right. It's for the rising and falling of many in Israel.
And so that confession that, the judgment unto sin, or unto hell, actually, is God's alien work. I mean, it's right there in the narrative.
Yeah.
You just don't. You see Jesus only reluctantly leaving people in their sins, only when they refuse to believe him. That's it. And even then, he keeps preaching to them.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think we have a flawed notion that grace and mercy can't be offensive to people. The rising of people is the receiving of grace. Again, the leper, if you would have mercy on me, Lord, I can be healed. And he's like, I do, be healed. Like, grace and mercy to the leper is like, this is the best thing ever. But the religious leaders who watch Jesus heal the leper, they see grace and mercy, they see it. And they're like, ugh, we got to kill this guy.
Well, and it is what you mentioned before, and I preached on this last Sunday, is that the grace and mercy in Jesus undermines Moses.
Yeah.
And so if your religious tradition is basically Jesus is a new Moses, but then you encounter Jesus in the Gospels, and you're like, wait a minute, that's not what he came to do. Right. He is like Moses in a lot of ways, but he's also quite unlike Moses, and he undermines Moses. He brings Moses to an end.
Right.
And so that, of course, grace and mercy is offensive to those who want to leave people under the oppression of the law. Yeah. Yeah.
And so we will end this podcast.
It's kind of Christmas, I guess. I don't know.
I was going to say, we technically have one more 2022 podcast, but it won't come out until after the New Year, right?
Yeah, we'll do a New Year's Eve thing. Will it be New Year's Eve? A day before New Year's Eve.
That's cool.
We could do a year wrap kind of thing. I don't know.
Let's do that. Tell you what, to those who are on the live stream.
Ooh, that would be interesting to look back at all the things we did all year. I have no idea.
To all the regulars, Melody, Paul, Antonio, who else we got on here who's a regular?
D-Fresh is back there.
D-Fresh is back there. Paul, I got you.
Chad, Franz.
Yes. There we go. Oh, yeah, Chad, you're up there now. Okay. I didn't see you, Chad. Hi, Chad. Yeah, if you've got anything you want to, because, the Christmas podcast we need, it's true. But yeah, if you have questions or you want us to go back and revisit things that we did in previous shows, or
we just did. We just read episode number 1, repeated in episode 286.
We went way back, though. We went in the way back.
We even reverted to our old form for
reason. Bring your Christmas movie recommendations. And I don't really have a New Year's Eve movie that I...
Well, that's Die Hard 2, by the way. But anyway, it's New Year's.
That's a good point. Yeah.
I don't know what people do on New Year's Eve. I go to bed.
I go to bed because it's just another day. Just another day.
I mean, what? Resolution? Oh, tomorrow I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday. Okay.
100%. What are we going to do today, Brain? Same thing we do every day, Pinky. Try to take over the world.
Right. I was like, I don't know. Do I have to resolve to do that again? I don't know.
Exactly.
I was already doing it.
So, Emmanuel, God is with you. He is always with you. The Christ is always your Christ. And anything else?
No, Merry Christmas.
So. That's the proclamation of all time. Yeah, Merry Christmas. Peace. There we go. Turn on the sync.
It's about as banned books as we can get, where it's like, let's just disregard the holiday, but make it about the holiday anyway.
Absolutely. No, it's the way it goes. I
have no idea what we said about this 4 years ago, so it is kind of interesting.
It definitely wasn't this, because I definitely didn't eat mushrooms right before I came over to record this podcast 4 years ago. No. Medical mushrooms, medical.
I know. I don't want to be confused. Don't confuse me.
I know. I'm on YouTube, though, so just want to make sure everybody understands.
Yes,
but
Merry Christmas.
They're medicinal, but they do have a certain effect when they first kick. It's kind of nice, actually. Combined with the HHC, it definitely makes me more focused and relaxed. But it's free-flowing, and I think since we started this, that's kind of been our nirvana, is to get to a point where we're just free-flowing without any kind of... Because I think the filters have to develop over time, and then once the filters develop, you can kind of just flow, because you're unconsciously staying inside the boundaries, because you've established them. They're kind of hard and fast.
Yeah, I think, it is interesting how you kind of fall into a rhythm.
It is a flow roll podcast, and if you're a white belt, you immediately go to 100%. And so, you have to learn how to flow.
Yeah. Well, I'll think maybe about what we could do next time.
Yeah, something fun, actually. We should do something fun. Because it's theology, and that would offend people who take themselves too seriously. Some funny theology.
Is there something funny? We haven't done Capen for a long time. We could do the supper the Lamb one.
Could do that. Could do.
We haven't done. We could do Genesis and get ourselves in trouble.
We could do
What?
Genesis. Oh, the mystery of Christ and why we don't get it. It's set up as a series of dialogues. And he gets.
Do I have that? I don't know
He
if I
gets
have that
super
one.
cheeky in that one. That's actually my favorite Capon book now.
Okay.
But,
It's just like the title, right? Because it has that perfect title, The Subversive.
Yeah.
And like,
Mystery
wait
of
a
Christ
minute.
And why we don't get it. Yeah. No, it's great.
Wait a minute. You can't offend me that way in the title. Well,
That's
just
right.
wait.
I'm offended that you're not trying to. Yeah. So cool.
All right. Good.
All right, kids. Stay inside. And everybody who has single digit below zero numbers, you're pathetic.
-4.
No.
Feels like -10.
Oh man, we're way below that, man. You.
No, is that right? No, that's not right. That's not feels like.
Yeah, no.
Where's
with the wind chill, we're at -37, I think, right now.
Let's see. UV feels like -31.
There you go. And like
It's
I
very
tell
windy.
people who don't know what I'm talking about, anything below -5 is just pain. It's just that's what it feels like. It just feels like pain. It's
Like
not.
what?
It's like
I'm still. I don't understand. Like you chose to live here.
right.
It's very nice in the summer. You know, it's mostly rarely gets
Mostly
into the
nice.
90s.
Yeah.
But
It's the I know. I live in a communist state, and the winters are brutal. I pray to live in the desert, and God ignores my pleas. So, bye, Dad. I don't.
oh, well, it could be worse because we've got out on the lake. We've got
Yeah.
28 foot
Yeah.
waves.
Ugh.
Because the water's still so warm and it's so
Oh,
freezing
really?
cold. Yeah, it does this. Apparently, on the Michigan side,
Yeah.
they're all going because the wind's all going west to east. So the
Mhm.
Michigan side, you can imagine those waves. But it's even not like Michigan. But what's even worse is if you go, you know that place. I don't know why people live on the east side of Lake Erie or
Right.
Lake Ontario. So like if you're in Buffalo, they're getting
Right.
obliterated with snow again.
Oh, Paul lives in Alberta. Well, Paul, when I'm captured by the invading Canadian forces of the UN,
Oh, so
would you buy me at the slave market? And
do you have a blue helmet? Maybe you should just get a blue helmet just in case.
right? Just so I can be camouflaged
For disguise.
right?
Yeah. It's cold everywhere.
It's true. It really is. So we gotta figure out how Harp is doing this, man.
I don't know. I mean,
Isn't it? It's interesting now that you see that Zek post that's gone viral about black pillars, blaming everything on Satan and everything's a psyop.
no, I haven't.
Yeah, it's been going viral, but I mean, he's got a certain point. I think he's arguing against categorizing and kind of again teaming by saying, well, I'm against this, but now I'm a part of this black pill team or I'm a white pill team, or that kind of stuff. But yeah, because
This has been my problem as of late. It's like people thought, oh, like you were a Trump supporter. I'm like, no, I just kind of like the mayhem of Trump. But really, I mean, if anything, I'm kind of a third party. But I'm not really even a third party. Like I don't even today. Like I like the Mises Caucus people in the Libertarian Party, but because Austrian economics, I do think you solve money, you're going to solve a lot of problems.
sure.
But on the other hand, it's like, yeah, I don't agree with everything. It's like, is that okay? It's like, do I have to be in a party? Why do we need parties, by the way?
Well, that's because we can't all just admit it's a wash at this point. Like nobody can.
Oh,
just
at this
go,
point,
you know
when
what? It's a wash, man. Like it's over.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's all.
So
end
you're a
this
great
over.
reset person. Look at you.
I know, right?
You just defaulted to it. It's like, oh, well.
See, it's in my brain.
Well, they kind of created the crisis, so they create the solution.
right. Again, read old books. Read Hegel. Read books,
We haven't, let's not read philosophy.
We should read Hegel on the show, though. We definitely have to do an Enlightenment theology
Well,
track.
and
with Schleiermacher, Hegel,
I've said it
and
so many times, but, Marx especially, and then Engels as well, recognized that they were presenting a new religion.
yeah. Yeah.
And if you read it as a religious text,
Yeah.
if you read Communist Manifesto as a religious text,
Mhm.
it's like, wow, that's really what it is.
Yeah. Right.
Like, we didn't see this?
Well, we can't because we're not a religious society. Not in a Western monotheistic religious.
Well, and I think part of it is too is like
Form.
we can't recognize that the language is malleable enough that
Right.
that sometimes you can disguise the religion with different words,
Yeah.
but they still have
Right.
religious meaning. You just don't you don't recognize that. Oh, that's a religion. It's a regular practice. It's a belief set or whatever, or there's
Well, I
tradition
think-
as well.
As an example, was watching Lila Downs' concert the other night. She's a famous Mexican singer. And she incorporates a lot of extreme, like old traditional Mexican fashion and culture into her stage performance and stuff.
Okay.
And so one of these headdresses, these headpieces that she was wearing, it's very ornate and it's white and it's, looks like a giant doily. But it was like, oh, that's very interesting. I wonder if she had that made just for this song. And it's like, and then later on, other people come out in the headpiece and you find out, no, it's actually a traditional headdress that they wear.
Mm-hmm.
And I use this as an example of, it's all the same. It's all sun goddess worship, though, because it all represents the halo, right? And over time, because it used to be just a straight up fire.
Oh, okay.
That they would wear on top of, like they'd have like a wreath, for example, like in Norway, right? The virgins would wear the pine wreath with the candles. And then they would have like corn stalks in the shape of a sun that they would wear as a headpiece. And then it slowly evolved into this like white lacy thing, but it's still the same thing, which is it's a shout back to the pagan fertility goddess, the corn goddess.
Right.
And like you said on the show, and I didn't want to go off on a tangent, but it's all east. It's all worship of the east. It's all worship of the sun.
Yeah, right.
So once
that was coming out of Ezekiel 8.
So
I couldn't help
once
it.
So once you recognize what the symbolism is and what symbology is, then when the language changes, you stop listening to the words and you start looking for the symbols. Right? This is the whole revelation of the method. They have to show you what they're going to do before they do it, because the devil will always tell you, this is what I'm going to do. And then he will say, this is how you're going to help me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So this is what I will do, and this is what I want you to do to help me.
Yeah. And it's the old devil's bargain idea.
Right, exactly. And so he'll just change the language a little bit, but he can't hide the symbols. Like Bensagi or whatever the name of the company is.
Right. I mean, that was always, that's right from the garden, right? Unless Eve, it wasn't that the key was that she not only listened to him, but she did what he said.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly.
Voluntarily, that she did it out of her own will. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the key. And if he can get you to do it through symbols, like Chad says, right, is that you don't have to espouse a God, but you're worshiping it or him or her or them like one.
Yeah, you don't have to believe in child sacrifice as long as you
engage
call
in
it something else and do it. Yeah.
As long as you keep doing it, and it's like, and in that way, then you keep a majority of the population ignorant, blind, because you're showing it to them. And therefore, it's like I recommend Inside Job on Netflix to people that don't believe in conspiracies. Like they don't think any conspiracies are true. And so they watch the show and they just laugh and laugh because it's a funny show. But then I point out, I'm like, you do realize they're trying to normalize mocking conspiracies.
Right.
Because there's a lot of things in the show that are actually real. They're true.
It's like the term conspiracy theory was created by the CIA in response to the JFK assassination, which they orchestrated.
Right.
So that we wouldn't actually pursue whether or not they were involved, which now we know because it's declassified mostly.
Right.
However involved they were. I mean, I thought the best declass was like, there were bullets flying everywhere. I'm like, wait a minnet. That's not the narrative
That's not
I've been told.
Justification, though. Like, well, it's hard. I mean, we could have killed him, but there were so many bullets flying everywhere.
It could have been his bodyguard. It could have been the Mossad guys. It could have been the CIA guys. It could have been the guy on the hill. I mean, who knows?
Right. Just a lot of bullets.
All we know is it wasn't the person they actually convicted for it.
Right. Well, not only that, but the FBI comes out and issues a statement, which is, anybody who talks about what we did as a conspiracy theorist, it's like, you didn't deny everything that you were just accused of.
No, actually, it was worse than that. They should have just kept their mouth shut. They just said, we work with private and companies and smaller entities all the time to suppress speech. And you're like, what?
Exactly. You're like, wait, you're just saying that out loud?
That's First Amendment?
Again, Obama...
I know, it's legal. I know it's legal.
It's legal. Doesn't mean it's ethical, but it's legal. But, we just shrug at that. We're like, you do realize that the FBI just admitted.
Are we back
publicly,
to the pre-show now?
We're a pre-show. We circled back. We're circling back around.
No, I do. It's like, why? Okay, why no outrage, no shame, no guilt? Maybe it's because it's Christmas time. Okay, fine. But, after Christmas,
I don't think people care.
The number's always $1.7 trillion omnibus bill, and it's actually it's 1.9.
Remember when,
what's another 200 billion? Who cares?
Remember about a decade ago when you and I would sit at Winkles and mock older pastors for worrying about social media and security issues? Would be
Mm.
like that's like a screen, like your security on social media is like a screen door on a submarine.
Well, I mean, when I was growing up, it was my mother was a librarian, and
Yeah.
she was constantly telling people to read books and not watch TV
Well, the same thing
in
right?
the 80s. You know,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
nobody listened.
Maybe she had a point for an entire generation raised on TV. But it just goes to the point of like when I say the things that I'm saying today about like the FBI,
Mm-hmm.
and again, millennials look at me like, okay, boomer. It's like the FBI is engaged in propaganda and psyoping us on social media. We knew that. It's like, wait, you're okay with that? They're like, whatever. We
Right.
have
That's
nothing
the
to hide.
that's the consequence of it all, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's not so much the erosion of freedom, but it's the lack of any kind of what do you want to say, understanding of consequence of this,
Right.
right? I mean, Patriot Act, or
Well, the
how
Chinese
far.
government admitted that they're harvesting TikTok. They're like,
No,
we're
what's
totally
worse?
using-
No, what's worse than TikTok is they're harvesting 23andMe, the
the
DNA
gene
services.
Thing. Yeah. Yep.
They've got a full mapping of the American genome, basically all the different ethnicities and
Right. That's why
Like-
Billy Gates keeps talking about how the next pandemic is going to be more deadly.
right, because they can target
Us.
genetically.
Yeah, exactly. They can. This is
We'll
the dream.
we'll omit
though.
the Chinese next time. Yeah.
This was the pre-World War I dream: is how can we kill all the people but preserve the cities of Europe?
Well, arguably that was the purpose of the genetic.
Yeah, I mean I think that's been the
experiments.
purpose since Cain, but at least in the
How can
late
we kill those
1800s.
people and not us? Yes,
Exactly. Yeah, and we've just gotten to the point now where instead of gas, we've gotten to the genetic level.
right. Thanks. there is some truth to this.
Thanks, Mormons.
What started as just tracing your family tree became a whole genetic psyop. Yeah.
Right. Well, there's that too.
Well, because they're not even true. How many people did it in the early days before
Right.
they had the big database,
Right.
and they were told, "Hey, you're Scandinavian or you got Norwegian or something," and then now you go back and it probably say, "Hey, you're actually
Yeah.
German after
It
all."
goes to the point. This is why the royals always have to have affairs to bring in fresh blood from outside under the cover of the pregnancy of the people that they're cousins to. This is why Charles's sons don't look the same, because they're not from the same mother.
I like Julian Castro, who lives up north.
Right.
Oh, that's not his last name. I'm sorry. What's his last name?
Shut up. Just because his mom was there exactly 9 months before he was born.
And they had an open marriage.
And then open marriage, and she and Castro both admitted to having numerous affairs. Whatever. Just because he looks exactly like Fidel, whatever. At a certain point, you're just crazy, you know.
Although I posted in our tinfoil halos the picture of Castro speaking to Congress. Oop, forgot that part of history.
That's
that got
right.
memory hold.
He was so good at it, though. That's the thing. That was a great speech before Congress.
Castro?
He
Yeah.
went after it. He swung for the fences. He wasn't playing games.
No,
He
I
was
think he
just
probably
there.
actually wrote it, whereas Zelensky didn't.
Well, obviously, no. I'm just saying though, like the dictators of the old days were so much like just like, oh yeah,
There's some
I hate you,
charisma.
you're
There's some
evil, but
charisma.
man, you had charisma.
Yeah, yeah.
Dictators today they're like like Zelensky,
They're just kind of lame.
nebbish,
Ugh.
foppish little men and women, just gross, withering away. By the way,
Can you imagine if like somebody actually stepped up that was actually quality? Be like, you're terrible, but I'm
Right.
following you because you at least,
100%.
yeah.
right?
Or maybe that is actually the Trump phenomena. Oh, well.
Well, it's the Musk phenomena. How about that?
It's definitely the Musk phenomena. Yeah.
Yeah, because this is great this morning on germ theory. I was reading that the question was asked, well, who's going to replace Klaus Schwab because he's going to die pretty quick? And of course, germ theory is like, well, Elon is, of course. And I was like, that would be so perfect for all those who are super pro Elon and super anti Great Reset. Like, I don't know what to do with my hands. Just absolutely losing
Well,
it.
somebody has to really beg the question. It's like, wait a minute, why is Elon so willing to lose like everything on
Right.
Twitter?
Well, you see his
He's-
tweet
he-
last night or the day before, and let's nuke Microsoft. He put up
Yeah.
the poll, should I nuke Microsoft?
Well, and Tesla tanked again today. They're down under. I mean, they've lost half their stock value in the last year.
Right.
Right. And he said he's not going to sell any more shares, but it's like, wait a minute, you're willing to stake your fortune in Tesla and
Yeah.
all on what, free speech? I'm not so sure.
Well, I mean, SpaceX and Tesla are being underwritten by the federal government, so I mean,
Well,
in the end,
and Twitter was too, as we know. At least the
still,
FBI
I
was
bet
sending them
I
money.
would say it still is. It's just we got a different team now.
I don't know.
Different crime families running the shop.
I don't know.
Nobody
They're
gets
blaming
that.
all the. If you shared that flag picture, the flag in the Ukrainian flag in the Congress, if you shared it, you got instant suspension.
Yep.
And people are like, "What? I thought it was free now. I thought we were free here." And so the excuse official from Twitter is that it was Ukrainian bots that did it. And you're like, wait a minute, how are Ukrainian bots causing people to be suspended?
It's in the cloud. What's the cloud? I don't know, but it's in it. It's like, okay, boomer.
Right. And so what are we supposed to do?
No one knows what's the cloud is.
I mean, I don't want to just be a Luddite, but I think there is a point to just walking away sometimes.
No, like
just
D-Fresh says, is that most of my days at this point, especially because of this whole anxiety thing, I when I read stuff now, I either laugh at the absurdity of it. Like, again, this winter expect air turbulence because of climate change. You're like, really? And yet I laugh because I know most people that read that headline believe it. So I'm going to be on a plane at some point in the next year. Actually, I'm going out to Paul and Cindy Koch's in February with Annie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm going to be on that plane, and we're going to hit turbulence over like the Rockies, and the pilot's going to be like, sorry, folks, but climate crisis is causing some turbulence up here right now, but we should be through it in another 3. And people are like, oh, good, it's the climate change. Okay.
And you'll just be sitting there laughing out loud.
Yeah, because you have to, because it's again, it's like someone in a dress and heels going, I'm a woman. And you're like, you're a dude. Like, you are obviously a dude.
I think we need to go reread The Emperor Has No Clothes.
Right, exactly. And I think, too, to Dee's point, what it's freed me up to do is to not give a shit about just calling it and going, no, you're a man. And I'm not calling you by pronouns. You can't be, like, you don't own pronouns.
Don't dead name people.
Right? Don't dead name people. Don't do it.
But except what's funny is that, like, if you had an Academy Award as a woman and now you consider yourself a man, your Academy Award went to the woman, or to the man now, even though it originally went to the woman.
Right.
But not if you got Olympic medals.
Correctamundo.
Those are not given to your new woman
version.
version.
Very woke of you to take them back, even though the same people who claim there's no gender.
They were awarded to you when you were a man, but yes, I don't know.
We don't see gender. He was a woman in his spirit when he won those medals. Right.
Like a spirit animal or something?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was possessed by the spirit of the ghost of Christmas future.
Oh, he was possessed by a male spirit that also caused him to have male parts, and then
correct. And then a female spirit. Yeah, this Oscar went to my dead name. Exactly. I'd like to thank the Academy. Dead name.
Don't transition until you get but after you get the award.
Right. Exactly. That's right. Hold off until after. Right.
Right, but see, this is the point. We're laughing at this. Yes, a lot of people are going to experience some great tragedy through it.
Right.
But I think that's the point. Like we've been reading Ezekiel, we read the prophets, read the Old Testament. It's like, actually, it's kind of the way of life and in this fallen world, right? Is that there is often a lot of tragedy because of stupid decisions people make.
100%.
And common belief that's stupid. Right.
I think the inversion that you see everywhere in the United States is that we know how this all ends. And that's what we're staking our claim on, is that no matter how bad it gets, no matter what happens to us, Jesus still wins. And we will still be raised to eternal life in the last day. Knowing that, then, we struggle with the hopelessness, not the unbelief necessarily, but the hopelessness that comes with all these constant, just doomy, gloomy things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whereas those who stake everything on hopelessness, on fatalism, futility, kind of nihilistic, we're not going anywhere.
No.
And it's just getting bleaker and bleaker, right? For them, they have to wrestle to find something to believe in, because their belief is just like, there's nothing here. And they become enslaved by that slave morality that Nietzsche wrote about.
Right.
And so we're wrestling with slavery to hopelessness, whereas they're wrestling with slavery to God.
Yeah. Purpose, meaning.
Yeah. Right. To say, well, is there any higher meaning to any of this? And their answer is no. So you just keep getting pushed back by the waves.
Well, it also explains the actions. Like, why would you do such
right.
things that seem like hopeless and just despair-inducing?
Right.
Well, it's because that's what we already have.
Right.
We're just living maximally within the terrible life that we have.
Right. Incubi.
Like, we're all going to die anyway, and we're already doing plastic surgery, so we might as well start putting chips in our brain and whatever else we want.
Exactly, right. That's what it breeds, is just, why not? Who cares? Like, again, like the kids with TikTok. Oof, dating myself there.
You just spend yourself into oblivion, because who cares? It'd be somebody else's problem down the line.
Yeah.
You saw the bill that passed. I don't know if it's going to pass the House, but it did pass the Senate. There's mandatory 401k contributions for us. Yeah, mandatory. Now they're going to match it, but it's a mandatory match.
Right.
It's like, wait a minute. Why would we have to start mandatorily participating in 401ks? Oh, yes, because the other thing that we also have to pay into is insolvent.
Yes, that's right. Let's just
and they
move,
don't care. They know that they'll be long dead and buried before anybody holds them to account.
Right. Exactly.
And they'll just have their name have a little asterisk after it in the history books.
Dude, how drunk was Nancy Pelosi after that? That video of her leaving chambers, going back to her office. Holy cow! Lady was on something. I'm not saying she was drunk, but she was high.
She was having a good time.
She was super loose. She didn't like walk across the floor so much as she just kind of like floated and stumbled. What's float stumbling? Whatever that is. Whatever float stumbling is, that's
That's
what
a new
did.
word. I haven't heard that one before.
But I was just like, whoa. Like, she wasn't even there. That's amazing. And yeah, that's why they push hopelessness, because it's going to breed fear and anxiety, and you're easy to manipulate because you're insecure all the time. Right?
Yeah.
It's like we were talking about with the weather. It's like, well, should we do this or that? It's like, what's the weather dictate? We'll just do what the weather dictates. Who cares?
Or why do we have to do what the weather dictates anyway?
And then the opposite. We had classes last night. It's 30 below, but everybody showed up for classes.
I thought we
Steve.
were enlightened people now that have transcended that.
Right. I don't see weather. I'm weather binary, non-binary weather. I'm meteorologically gender fluid. I'm weather fluid, so I don't see. That's why I wore my slides outside when it was 33 below yesterday and almost froze my toes off in like a minute.
I think you need tacos.
I do. So bad.
You're getting a little
Sloating. Sounds like a good Finnish word. Sloat.
It doesn't quite roll off the tongue.
Where are you going to? The sloat. All right. I've lost it. It's over.
All right. Ending broadcast.
Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Bye.
God bless.